Hey guys. This is part 2 of What If Naruto was in RWBY. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 6. Ladies and gentlemen, are you all ready? The question that boomed out from the sound system that was built into each of Beacon Academy's arenas was answered by a roar of applause and general noise-making. Very few of the people watching took any stake in either of the competitors, only being there to see what would no doubt be an entertaining fight, and knowing who was fighting. How could it not be? On one side was Naruto Uzumaki, who had begun to make a name for himself at the prestigious academic institution. Many knew him as the carefree and goofy blonde who could make a joke out of most anything. There was also a large portion of the male populace, and some of the female students, who envied him for being so close with Pira Nikos. Despite all that though, many also knew the blonde was not one to be messed with. It was proven time and time again in the various battle-oriented classes that the blonde was a surprisingly genius strategist, and was more than capable of holding his own against both Grimm and fellow huntsmen. Carden, while not as seemingly intelligent as his blonde opponent, was still the captain of his team, and such a position was not so easily gained, with people like Ashpin and Glinda being the deciding factors on how teams were formed. Regardless of who won, the ensuing fight was sure to be entertaining. The announcer, a nondescript older male student who had volunteered for the job, rallied the crowd of teens with another booming call. I said, "Are you ready?" The arena nears shook from the volume of the applause and shouting the crowd let loose in response. In the observation deck that looked down on both the audience and the actual battlefield, the professors of Beacon sat, watching as their students let out their inner teenager. Glinda Goodrich, the stern woman that she was, held a displeased frown on her face. She had been against Ashpin's decision to turn the young Uzumaki and Winchester's punishment into a sporting event, but loath as she was to admit it, Ashpin was her boss and held final say in all matters regarding Beacon and its students, within reason of course. Ashpin himself stood, leaning against his ever-present cane, sipping on his mug of coffee. His face betrayed nothing, his silver orbs trained intently on the, as of now, empty field below. Many of his staff had questioned his decision to allow something like this to take place, none more vocal in their protests than his old friend and vice principal, Glinda. Of course, many took this as Ashpin's eccentricities rearing their head, but this was far from the truth. Ashpin was many things, but foolish was not one of them. He was keenly aware of the delicate situation that had consumed the Faunus people. Personally, he would love to see the illogical discrimination against Faunus gone, but as the head of Beacon and a key player in Vale and her politics, he knew he could not make his opinions vocal. Not with the White Fang being so prominent, at least. Still, he was less than happy with one of his students, a bright and strong huntress to be at that, being treated in such a manner. He was also less than pleased with the manner in which his own staff members handled the situation, but that was a talk for another time. If he could, he would have actually liked to give young Naruto a pat on the back for acting in defense of a fellow student. Unfortunately, due to his position, he could not do so, and so Ashpin decided to settle for the next best thing, giving the blonde enigma the chance to finish what Glinda had stopped. In this way, not only would he allow those who wished to see Carden get his comeuppance, himself included, see just that, but it would also make it seem like he didn't condone the young Uzumaki's brash actions without actually having to punish said teen. A win-win situation for all, really. Well, except for Carden, but he deserved what was coming to him, so that didn't matter really. First up is Carden Winchester, captain of Team CRDL, Cardinal. The crowd of teens clapped, though there was no real vigor to it, none either liking the smug-looking teen or not wanting to reveal their own prejudices against Faunus. Despite the lackluster greeting, the tall brunette teen managed to look as cocky as was possible, his weapon, a mace, situated on his shoulder. Garbed in armor that looked reminiscent of the kind worn in the days of the knights, the teen managed to at least look the part of a warrior. His opponent tonight is Naruto Uzumaki, leader of Team NNPR. As the blonde teen calmly walked out from the shadows of the competitors' hall, the stadium erupted into cheers. Even amongst the wall of noise that slammed into him, Naruto was easily able to make out the sounds of Yang, RWBY, Nora, and even Pira cheering him on. With his enhanced hearing, he was able to pinpoint where it came from, and lo and behold, there they sat, right at the first row of seats opposite the entrance he had come through. RWBY, Yang, and Nora, being the more boisterous of his group of friends, were proudly and loudly cheering whilst waving a rather large banner that stated in bright orange letters, "Kick some butt, Naruto!" Locking eyes with them, Naruto chuckled at their exuberance, and waved to them. His eyes trailed over Weiss, who was trying to look as uninterested as she could, though it was clear from the smirk on her face that she had all the confidence that Naruto could defeat Carden. He shared a silent nod with Blake, the feline faunus offering a smile and a wave of a little flag that bore the signature Uzumaki spiral on it. His eyes then traveled to meet with his only male friend, Ren, who only nodded at him in acknowledgement. Finally his eyes locked with the bright green eyes of Pira, who was wildly waving about her own little flag. The redhead offered a smile and mouthed the words, "You can do it," to him. In return, Naruto smiled and nodded before giving her a cheesy thumbs up, causing her to giggle at his carefree behavior. What surprised him though was when he saw that Team CFVY was seated not too far from his friends, cheering him on in their own way. The sunglasses-wearing leader of the team used a finger to lower said shades down just far enough to offer him a flirtatious wink, something quite a few people noticed, his own team included. The bunny-eared faunus of the team smiled demurely at him, and clapped loudly to show her support, while the male members of the team quietly nodded at him, obviously not being ones for many words. "You ready to lose, Blondie?" Carden called out from across the arena. Naruto decided that if his opponent wanted to try trash talk this early, he was going to begin his own little mind games as well, and who better to do that than one of the students of Kakashi Hatake? Taking a page out of his sensei's book, Naruto slackened his posture and casually slipped his hands into his pants pockets, closing his eyes and offering a lazy smile to top it all off. Did you say something? Now if only I knew how Kakashi-sensei did that weird-eye thing, Naruto thought to himself. To his credit, Carden only looked annoyed by Naruto's antics. "TCH, whatever. The faster I kick your ass, the faster I can finish my stupid punishment." Naruto shrugged nonchalantly in response. Having been underestimated for a vast majority of his life, he was used to it now. A few years ago he would have answered back to Carden's insult by trying to show the team just how strong he really was. Now, he could care less what someone like Carden thought of him. In the end, it also benefited him. Carden thinking so little of him would give Naruto that much more of an advantage. It would also give the blonde the satisfaction of humiliating Carden in front of a huge chunk of Beacon's student body, seeing that the two males were ready to go and would more than likely start the fight soon regardless of if he started the match. The portly Professor Port stepped between Naruto and Carden and spoke in a voice that boomed throughout the stadium. "This will be a match between Carden Winchester and Naruto Uzumaki. The terms of the match have been set before this, and these two young lads have already agreed to them. The aura shields are up, so feel free to let loose, but I will intervene if I feel it is getting out of hand." Naruto and Carden nodded at the rules of the fight, having already heard from both Professor Goodwitch and Ashpin about the rules earlier that morning. "Ready? Begin!" With speed belying his body's shape and size, Professor Port jumped away from what would no doubt become a miniature war zone. Carden was quick to rush in, speeding towards Naruto with his mace poised to strike. Naruto seemed to be unfazed by this and stood there, looking as lazy as was possible. With a heave, Carden gave a mighty horizontal swing of his weapon, intent on slamming it into Naruto's ribs, which, even with the shields up, would no doubt crack some bones if it hit. And Naruto may have an abnormally fast healing factor thanks to his mother, but that didn't mean he couldn't feel pain. He just had a higher tolerance for it than most. Still, with that same lazy posture, the blonde ducked underneath the swing. With the balance and agility that came with being a trained shinobi, Naruto answered back with a swift side kick, throwing Carden's feet out from under him and putting said teen flat on his ass with a surprised expression on his face. Naruto simply hopped away, creating space between himself and the still dazed Carden. Deciding to add insult to injury, the blonde Jinchuriki let out a yawn, causing the crowd to erupt into laughs at the dumbstruck look on Carden's face, clearly getting progressively angrier due to his opponent not taking him seriously, and with the sounds of derisive laughter aimed at him not helping that, Carden leapt to his feet and was racing towards Naruto yet again. Our blonde protagonist for his part looked as carefree as if he was taking a stroll through the park. When Carden raised his mace high into the air, making it very clear that he planned to pummel Naruto into the ground, the Jinchuriki kept the same bland look on his face. When the weapon was inches away from slamming into the blonde's cranium, Naruto's friends began to worry. When Carden's weapon smashed into the ground and a cloud of dust was kicked up, they really began to worry, and even Professor Port was ready to rush back to the field to see if the young Uzumaki was still alive after a blow like that. What happened next simultaneously had people laughing and teams RWBY and NNPR on the verge of a heart attack. You really shouldn't let your opponents get behind you. The next thing Carden knew, he had a mouth full of dirt. Up in the stands, 3 very confused members of Team RWBY applauded while attempting to figure just how in the world Naruto not only got behind Carden without anyone in the stands noticing, but how he had managed to trip the brunette from so far away as well. Deciding that the best person to ask was Pira, someone he was known to spar with often, RWBY spoke. Hey Pira! How did Naruto manage to do all of that without anyone noticing? Keeping her eyes glued to the match below, Pira replied. Naruto is fast, amazingly so. I don't know exactly how fast, but I've seen him just disappear. As for tripping Carden, look closely. Deciding to listen, Yang, RWBY, and Weiss peered closely at Naruto and Carden. As Naruto casually dodged yet another swing from Carden, the light reflected off of something, causing them to scratch their heads. Before they could ask what it was, Blake spoke aloud. Ninja wire, so thin it's almost impossible to see, but strong enough to cut through skin. Pira nodded. Correct. He usually keeps a spool of it in the pouch on his hip. The 3 members of RWBY turned to their raven-haired teammate quizzically. How did you know that, Blake? Just as focused on the match as Team NNPR, the teen fauness answered without looking at her teammates. Because that's where I got the idea for my ribbons. Seeing Naruto dodge out of the way of yet another of Carden's swings only for her to pull on the thin wires causing the mace wielder to trip and fall again, Team RWBY could see how Blake got the idea for her ribbons. However, there was a difference in the style in which Blake and Naruto used their chosen materials. Blake used them in tandem with her main weapon, making it all that much more deadly. Naruto was using it as his only weapon, showing just how good he was at using them and how much more skilled he was than Carden in general. To the spectators, this meant that Naruto must have trained extensively in the use of ninja wire. Of course, that was from the truth. Naruto had just always liked using the stuff to help him in his pranks. He was also far and away from being a master at using the ninja tool. The only master he had encountered had been a rogue nin by the name of Akasuna no Sasori, Sasori of the Red Sands. Said rogue was a deadly threat not only because of his talent with ninja wire and its chakra equivalent, chakra strings, but because of how he used them to control hundreds of deadly human puppets, commanding them with the slightest twitches of his fingers. That and Carden was just wildly swinging about in hopes of hitting him. Honestly, how poorly had the rest of this guy's team done for him to be named captain? At first Naruto thought it was simply because he had been trained as a shinobi, but that went out the window quickly. Pira, RWBY, Ren, and even Nora put up far more of a fight than this guy did, so it wasn't that there was that huge of a gap between shinobi and huntsman. Tripping Carden again by pulling on the ninja wire wrapped around his ankles, Naruto sighed before using a small burst of futon, wind release, chakra to cut the thin wires, freeing Carden from their coils. Naruto had thought there would be more fun in messing with Carden, but now it was just getting boring. If he was free to use his jutsu, then he would have been free to really pull off some funny and humiliating pranks. But with Ashpin and half the school watching so closely, that wouldn't be the smartest of ideas. Shrugging, the blonde Jinchuriki decided to humiliate Carden some other time where he would really be able to put his prankster skills to work. As Carden blindly rushed him, yet again, Naruto decided that he had wasted enough time and energy. Right as Carden was inches from him, Naruto moved to the side, his arm held straight out. Before Carden realized what happened, he was gasping for air while hung over his opponent's outstretched arm. Moving his arm out from under Carden, who now looked like an upside-down U, Naruto slammed his elbow into Brunette's spine with devastating force. Many had no doubt that had the aura barriers not been up, Carden would have possibly been paralyzed with as powerful as Naruto had hit him. Even still, the aura shields could only do so much, and the leader of CRDL would no doubt have a nasty bruise on his back by the end of the day. You know, for a guy that talks so much trash about me, I thought you'd put up a better fight. Guess I was wrong. Naruto shrugged. As he taunted his downed opponent, Naruto now understood why some of his opponents liked to do it so much. It really was pretty fun to mess with your opponents. Then again, they ended up getting their asses handed to them, because they had underestimated him. If anything, he had been overestimating Carden though. As said teen rose to his feet, an angry snarl on his face, Naruto had to give it to the guy. He could take a hit. The clothesline alone would have put a lesser opponent down for a few minutes. Carden had tanked not only that but the elbow drop as well and was still getting up. Still not having learned his lesson, Carden bum rushed Naruto one last time. Naruto raised an eyebrow before shrugging. Prepared to end the fight with one last decisive blow, the blonde teen decided at the last minute to go out with a bang. Oh, Pyrrha said as she saw the look now on Naruto's face. Weiss, along with the others, was curious to know why Pyrrha suddenly seemed so worried. What? Blondie's got this one in the bag, so why oh? Because whenever Naruto has that look on his face, it means someone is about to be embarrassed. I just feel bad for Carden. Near leaping from her seat, Young cheered loudly. I don't. Cough him up like a hairball foxy. Those near the exuberant blonde of Team RWBY put palm to face at the less than funny attempt at humor. As Carden swung and missed, again, Naruto disappeared from sight. Like I said, don't let your opponents get behind you. Kanahigakur Haiden Taijutsu Oji, Sanin Garoshi. No sound was made. In fact, it seemed as if the entirety of Beacon had gone eerily still. Even the wildlife had stopped moving, as if knowing that some great disturbance in nature had occurred. The first sound to be made was the muffled voice of Blake echoing throughout the arena. Hidden Leaf Village Secret Finger Technique, 1000 Years of Death, you can't be serious. As Carden was blasted into the air via poking of the booty hole, the crowd erupted into uproarious laughter, most crying or holding their stomachs in an attempt to gather some breath. Yan was literally rolling on the floor, holding her sides in laughter. Ruby had covered her mouth in a poor attempt to quell the laughter, but she soon joined her sister on the floor. Weiss looked horrified, but was at the same time guffawing behind her hand. Blake still had her palm planted firmly on her face, though a blush could be seen stretching across her cheeks. Nora was holding on to Rin so that she didn't end up like Ruby and Yang. Said raven-haired male was meanwhile trying his hardest to not laugh, and instead ended up looking slightly constipated. Pyrrha was shaking her head and laughing at the same time, thinking, only you would do something like this, Naruto. In the professor's booth there were many looks of pure surprise and some even trying as hard as they could to not burst out into laughter like their students. The blonde deputy headmistress of Beacon, however, was not with her colleagues and had no problems in voicing her opinion on Naruto's attack. The audacity! I have never seen something so appalling, and to have the sheer shameless bravado to call that an attack. I think it was fitting, came the voice of Ojban as he sipped on his coffee. While everyone around him had reacted in some form to Naruto's technique, Ojban stood as calmly and stoically as was his norm. There was not even so much as a raise in either of his eyebrows. The silver-haired headmaster had taken Naruto's finisher as seriously as any other move he had seen, and Glinda was surprised by this. Taking a minute to think about it though, she really shouldn't be all that surprised by Ojban's acceptance of the situation. He had always taken even the most out of the ordinary situations in stride. It was what had made him such a fierce and powerful huntsman, and the reason he was trusted to run Beacon in the first place. as Carden lay in the appropriately named face down, ass up position, unconscious from either shame or pain. Professor Port coughed into his hand. Yes, well, the victor of this match is Naruto Uzumaki. Those who had recovered from their bout of laughter cheered, while those who hadn't attempted to cheer as well, but only ended up choking in the process. The medics soon arrived to cart Carden away, none of them too eager to treat such an odd case. How exactly did one go about healing an injury to the anus anyways? The days after the fight between Naruto and Carden had seen a return to the somewhat normal. Team NNPR was back to taking care of their classes and training when their schedules allowed them the time, and Naruto had become somewhat of a feared opponent in the battle classes. Of course, he was only one among a few others who had earned the top spots. In fact, both teams RWBY and NNPR had become known for their above-average prowess on the battlefield, and many of their fellow freshman class dreaded being pitted against any of the members from either team. As for Carden, well, he wasn't seen for 2 days, and when he finally did start going back to class, nobody, not even some of the professors, could look at the leader of Team CRDL without chuckling. It didn't help that he had to sit on a specially shaped pillow so as to avoid causing pain to his injured backside. Naruto had also been sought out by Team CFVY, something which his friends were curious about. Of course, that curiosity stemmed from the interactions between their blonde friend and the brazen leader of CFVY. The older teen seemed to have no qualms with openly flirting with and teasing Naruto, something which seemed to bother Pira, Blake, and Yang. Of course, Pira's reason for being bothered by Naruto's relationship with the older female was, while unknown to her, obvious to most others. Nobody knew why Blake seemed to not like the team leader of CFVY, and she didn't know why either. Yan, however, openly admitted that she didn't like the older girl, because she felt that only she should be able to flirt with and tease her fellow blonde. This seemed to be more of a case of two such bold and strong personalities butting heads. Naruto, being the still somewhat oblivious blonde he was, didn't pick up on any of this and happily made friends with Team CFVY, which led to him actually learning their names. The girl he had previously likened to Anko, he found, was Coco, a name he found aptly fit her. The bunny-eared fauness he had defended before was named Velvet Scarlatina. The two silent male teammates were Fox, the skinnier red-haired one which Naruto and Kurama had a good laugh at, and Yatsuhashi. Thanks to his befriending the elder team, Naruto was able to learn a little bit more about how Beacon functioned and prepared their students for the field. Sadly, first-year students were restricted from taking part in missions, which brought Naruto to tears. On the other hand, he was happy to find out that the lowest missions they could take were assisting the local police force, a far cry from the D-rank missions he had done with his genin team. However, the level of missions they could take depended on their performance in their first year, at the end of which they would receive a rank as an individual and as a team. In Naruto's mind, all this amounted to was, "First year is going to be boring." Seeing the mopey look on Naruto's whiskered face, Velvet felt bad and revealed to him a little-known fact that not many students used. They were free to leave Beacon's grounds as long as they were either done with their classes or had none. The blonde Jinchuriki was quick to exploit this, and had boarded one of the various transport ships that ferried students between Vale and Beacon. He had tried to convince the others to tag along, but they all had work to do for one class or another. Of course, he had already finished his work thanks to a certain jutsu of his. And so we find our whiskered protagonist strolling through the streets of Vale's market district with Kurama wrapped around his neck. "How does his place not have any damn ramen stands?" Naruto cried to the heavens. Beacon's ramen was, while not the best he had ever had, decent, but he figured that an actual ramen stand would have a far better tasting menu, seeing as how they made it from scratch. 17 years together and I still don't understand how you can eat so much of that slop, Kurama commented. Glaring heatedly at his furry companion, Naruto retorted, "It is the food of the kami, and you will show it the respect it deserves." Putting paw to snout, the chibi-fied QB sighed, "Were it not for me and your Uzumaki blood, you would have probably died from a blood clot with how you inhale the stuff. Even worse, if not for that big-chested woman you call a godmother, you would have stayed a midget for the rest of your life." Naruto seemingly ignored his bijou and instead pondered on something else. Death by ramen. Yup, Definitely how I want to go out. My hatred of you and your family knows no bounds. Love you too, buddy. Kurama? Why can't you leave me in peace? When did we end up in Vale's red light district? Probably around the time I was contemplating strangling you with my tails. So, what, 5 minutes or so ago? Roughly. Naruto stared in mild curiosity as he looked upon what had to be one of the nicest looking clubs he had seen in a red light district, and he had been in a lot of red light districts, more than any 17-year-old had any business in visiting. Albeit most of the time it was because he had to drag Jiraiya's shit-faced butt out of some brothel or strip joint. How that pervert of a man had managed to train both Naruto and his father into respectably strong and capable shinobi was a wonder in and of itself. Back to the matter at hand, Naruto was wondering if Vale's police force were either that terrible, or the owner had deep enough pockets to pay off some higher-ups. The place almost literally screamed, "Many illegal things go on inside me." Shrugging, Naruto decided that if he couldn't get his hands on any ramen he might as well enjoy some sake. Thanks to the gift/curse of being both a Jinchuriki and an Uzumaki, Naruto lacked the ability to get drunk. His body naturally purged itself of anything it considered toxic or poisonous before it could take effect, so the only way to possibly get him drunk was to either seal off his link to Kurama or guzzle enough hard liquor to kill several dozen fully grown men. Waltzing into the rather large club, Naruto raised an eyebrow at the DJ who had a bare head on as he blasted some tune or another. The blonde had never really invested too much interest in music, and so he cared little for it, and saw it as nothing but background noise. Stepping up to the bar portion of the club, Naruto noticed the odd looks he was getting from the employees, no doubt due to his age. Of course he shrugged them off with ease. Most of the shinobi villages operated on the old enough to kill, old enough to drink policy, which meant as soon as you got a headband you were by all rights a legal adult in the eyes of the village. Regardless of his age though, the bartender strode over to him and asked, "What can I get ya?" "Chilled sake, please," Naruto replied. Nodding, the bartender wandered off to retrieve said drink and the saucers needed, leaving Naruto, and who the blonde assumed to be either the manager or owner of the club, judging by how the various employees looked to him for orders and such. "Aren't you a little too young to be hanging out in a place like this, kid?" the well-dressed man asked. Naruto turned his head slightly and shrugged. "I'm a paying customer, so does it really matter?" The older male grinned. "Haha, good point, kid. Just don't expect any special treatment here." That said, the man walked off to do whatever he needed to, leaving Naruto alone. Seeing as how his drink still hadn't arrived, the blonde took the time to survey the crowd of people. The dance floor was surprisingly packed, a writhing mass of bodies moving in time with the pulsing beat of the music while the lights performed their own number. Naruto was none too surprised to see some rather wealthy-looking people mixed in among those who made their living through underhanded means. All too often those with too much money liked to think that said funds made them more protected, and so they felt more daring, wanting to see the fringes of society, as it were. What did catch his eye were two outlandishly dressed twins who looked to be about his age. One of the twin girls was dressed in a mostly red Lolita-themed outfit with her counterpart in an all-white version of the dress. The two drew attention mostly because of how far removed they looked. They didn't look to be in the club as patrons, nor did they look to be employees as they were in their own little section of the club. If Naruto had to guess, they either worked directly for the club owner, or this place catered to certain people's needs, and the girls were the ones responsible for entertaining those guests. Naruto was more inclined to believe the former, seeing the weapons they had hidden on them and the amount of aura he could feel from them. Hell, one of them alone had more than the guy who had just talked to them. No doubt they made a deadly pair. Seeing the bartender finally come back with a bucket and a saucer, Naruto shrugged off those thoughts and decided to indulge himself. Just because he couldn't get drunk didn't mean he didn't enjoy the taste and feel of alcoholic drinks. Right as the saucer hit his lips, Kurama spoke through their mental link, "Kit, incoming. Two heavily negative presences are about to walk in, and one feels eerily similar to that snake Orochimaru." It was times like these that Naruto both hated and was grateful for Kurama's negative emotion sensing ability. It had saved their skins several times, and it was also nice to figure out who were the bad guys, so to speak. On the other hand, it was usually only triggered at times like this, when Naruto really didn't want to get involved with something. The fact that one of the people was apparently so full of negativity that Kurama had compared them to one of the most vile humans they ever had the displeasure of meeting was terrible icing on an already terrible cake. Why do I have the feeling that one way or another, I'm going to end up fighting one of them right now? Naruto grumbled. Because you and Lady Luck have a love/hate relationship, Kurama replied back with a grin. Walking in through the doors was a rather effeminate-looking man who wore a bowler hat over his deep orange hair. He walked with a cane that looked like it was more for show than anything. The smirk on his face made Naruto's skin crawl, and the way he held himself just screamed egomaniac. Walking next to him was a petite girl with half her hair a bright pink and the other half a light brown. She carried an umbrella with her and bore an odd smile that normally would have made her look all the more cuter, but for some reason put Naruto on edge. Either she wasn't right in the head or she knew exactly what she was doing to get such a reaction. Strutting in behind the man and his companion was a woman in high heels and a maroon-colored dress with gold accents. In other circumstances, Naruto would have admitted that she was a beauty with her raven locks and searing gaze. Despite her petite figure, Naruto had no doubt that Jiraiya would have been all over her in seconds, rest his perverted soul. However, right now he didn't see her as a random woman walking into a bar looking for a good time. No, he saw her as a potential enemy, and seeing the way she carried herself, rightfully so. This was a woman who had power in spades and knew how to use it. She was trained, she was powerful, she was deadly, and she knew it. In a boisterous voice that just made Naruto want to smash his fist into his face, the effeminate man spoke aloud. "Junior! I knew you would do anything for money, but allowing a minor to sit at your bar and drink? How sad to see how corrupt our world has become to allow such a thing." The now named Junior, the guy who had spoken to Naruto beforehand, seemed as equally put off by the man as Naruto. "Torchwick! Getting that kind of talk from you of all people doesn't have the same effect." Hearing the name of the girly man, Naruto tensed and narrowed his eyes. He had heard the name on various news stations. Wanted for several robberies and a whole lot of other less than legal stuff, the guy was on top of Vale's most wanted list. "Oh, come now, Junior, my old friend. You say that like I'm some low-life criminal or something. You and I both know I'm more into high crimes and enjoying the finer things in life." Torchwick replied with that same sickening grin. Waving off the eccentric man and no doubt wanting to get rid of him as fast as possible, Junior spoke. "Whatever. What do you want this time, Torchwick?" Torchwick seemed ready to reply with another, witty, remark, but was cut off by the woman who stood next to him. "Enough, Torchwick. Get what we came for and let's go." Clearly upset at being cut off, Torchwick grumbled to himself. All right, geez. You heard the boss lady. The usual." Junior shrugged. "Fine. 50 men it is. You know the fee." Eyes turning to Naruto, Torchwick smirked and made his way over to the bar, slinging an arm around Naruto's shoulders. "How about you, huh? Looking for some work? It pays good money." It was only thanks to Torchwick's experience and the pronounced growling that he was able to move away from Naruto fast enough to avoid becoming Kurama's chew toy. Suffice to say, he and the others who were watching in interest were shocked to see what they had thought to be a scarf turn out to actually be a living, breathing creature, a fox no less. It was clearly evident, though, that the fox was not happy with Torchwick touching Naruto, showing by its displeasure with the man by glaring heatedly at him and snarling loud enough to be heard over the music. The blonde seemed unaffected by his fox attacking Torchwick, taking another sip of his sake before speaking. "Sorry, buddy, not interested. Besides, I don't swing that way." Junior laughed at the thinly veiled jab at Torchwick's sexuality, and it seemed even the man's boss or accomplice found it funny if her smirk was anything to go by. Torchwick huffed and adjusted his head. "I'd get a muzzle for that thing, kid, before it bites the wrong person and gets you into a lot of trouble." Naruto grinned and turned around to fully face Torchwick. "I wouldn't worry about it too much. Kurama knows how to tell slime balls like you apart from everyone else. The wanted man was now clearly growing tired of the blonde's less than subtle jabs at him. I'd watch it, kid, you're messing with the wrong person. As Naruto stated down Torchwick with the utmost confidence, the DJ seemed to have an excellent sense of timing and changed up the song choice. Snapping his fingers, Torchwick huffed. Neo! Handle this, kid. The umbrella-toting girl smiled and nodded, not once making any sound. Turning, she winked at Naruto before bowing at the waist and taking an oddly relaxed stance with her umbrella laying against her shoulder. Standing across from her, Naruto reached to his side and grabbed the scroll that housed Hai no Ishi, and with a quick swipe of a bloody digit, the shakujo was held in his right hand, garnering many raised eyebrows at the odd sight of not just the weapon, but the means of retrieving it as well. Great, you're one of those silent types, always so annoying to fight, Naruto commented with a grin. He had been looking for a good fight, and while fighting his teammates was fun, he couldn't really unwind for fear of revealing something or hurting them in some way. Here, where no one knew him and where he had no qualms about causing collateral damage, he could finally let loose a bit. It also helped that most of the club's patrons had long since left out of fear, something Junior didn't look too happy about. Been a while since we let loose, Kit? Show that buffoon who he's messing with, Kurama said with a grin stretching across his face. I swear I was never this battle-hungry, Naruto commented. You're an Uzumaki and my Jinchuriki. You live for this. Twirling his shakujo, Naruto grinned. Let's see if I still got it. The music paused at the right time, Naruto tensing and his short opponent staring him down with that same smile. The music surged back to life, hitting like a wall of sound, and in that same instant Naruto was gone from sight, surprising everyone with how fast he had moved. The diminutive girl was only barely able to bring her umbrella up, blocking Naruto's swing of his shakujo. Spinning her umbrella, Neo attempted to knock the staff out of the blonde's hands, only to get a stomach full of Naruto's foot, sending her skidding backwards and onto the dance floor. Frowning, Neo blinked, changing her eye color at the same time, something which Naruto found only slightly odd. Shrugging, the blonde Jinchuriki sped off towards Neo, only to have his horizontal swipe blocked by the shorter girl's oddly sturdy umbrella. The ice cream-themed girl smiled mockingly at her opponent. She was, however, thrown off guard though when, instead of looking shocked, Naruto just grinned right back. Nodding his head behind her, Neo allowed her gaze to flicker to see what he was looking at, only to be shocked when she saw a second grinning blonde rushing at her from behind. Taking advantage of her smaller size, Neo used her other hand to lean on Naruto's shoulder, and with a shove she back-flipped over the second blonde, slamming her heel into its head on her way back down to the floor. Instead of the second Naruto being knocked unconscious or being sent to the floor like many expected, it went up in a poof of smoke, obscuring Neo from vision. This seemed to play into Naruto's plan perfectly, as he was quick to rush blindly into the smoke. With the white clouds still obscuring their vision, the spectators could only hear the sounds of metal hitting metal and accompanied by the occasional shadow being seen through the smoke. Futon de Tapa, wind release, great breakthrough. The spectators were forced to quickly grab onto something as a mighty gale of wind suddenly swept through the club with enough force to send anything not nailed down flying. Neo, weighing very little, was hurled through the air and slammed into one of the club's walls with the heavy force of the winds keeping the diminutive girl pinned there. Naruto wasn't finished though, as he flashed through a chain of unknown hand gestures so quickly that his hands looked to be little more than blurs. Landing on the last of the odd gestures, the blonde inhaled deeply. Katan, Ryuka no Jutsu, fire release, dragon flame technique. Exhaling, Naruto unleashed a stream of flames from his mouth in a manner similar to the mythic beast the technique was named for. To the spectators' further surprise, instead of what remained of the winds consuming the flames, they instead seemed to feed and give it direction, aiming the infernal stream towards the still dazed Neo. None seemed to be more intrigued by the unique attacks of the boy than the mysterious raven-haired woman. This boy. There's no way this could be dust manipulation. I've never seen someone control the elements with such ease. The only answer is that this is his semblance, or he's the end result of some inhumane experiment involving dust. Allowing himself to relax, Naruto sighed and raked a hand through his blonde locks. I will never enjoy killing. Good, that means that you are still capable of emotions. When you stop feeling guilty, then that is a cause for worry, Kurama spoke sagely. Grinning, Naruto began to scratch behind Kurama's rabbit-like ears. Never thought I'd hear something like that from you. Despite the pleasure he felt at the scratching, the Bijou grumbled, Please, I am nothing like that idiot Shikaku. The only time I've ever killed en masse was when Dodge. Naruto was painfully pulled from his thoughts when he felt a foot slam into his abdomen, causing him to bend over said limb. The follow-up that was just as painful, the blonde getting a heel to the face which sent him sliding across the floor like a hockey puck. Dumbass, that's what you get for letting your guard down. The hell was I supposed to know she would survive a futon-powered Ryuka to the face? You're a shinobi moron. You're supposed to be prepared for everything. If you hadn't noticed, there are no other shinobi around. Yeah, well, if you don't get up and move, there won't be any shinobi period. Rolling to the side, Naruto was able to avoid being skewered by an umbrella of all things. Looking up, he could see a less than pleased Neo frowning at him. The edges of her clothes were either cut up or slightly singed, while her umbrella was heavily burned and looked to be on the verge of breaking. Standing up straight, Naruto could already feel his chakra start to repair the damage he had taken. For such a small thing, she managed to pack quite the wallop. With her first kick, she had managed to bruise some of his ribs and knock them out of place, while her heel kick had broken his jaw and slightly cracked his skull. As Naruto rubbed his sore jaw, he pondered to himself, maybe I should look into that whole using your chakra/aura as a shield thing after all. While Naruto dodged another kick from Neo, Kurama spoke, it would be pointless. Anything short of someone ripping out your heart or cutting your head off would just be healed anyways. With an outstretched hand, Naruto caught the next of Neo's kicks, keeping her literally on her toes. Shoving said limb to the side to throw her off her balance, Naruto went for a palm strike to the chest. Instead of stumbling, Neo spun and whipped up her parasol, smacking Naruto's hand away. Twirling high no ishi, the blonde aimed a swing at the shorter girl's legs. The staff was stopped short by Neo's umbrella. Naruto in turn aimed a punch at the shorter girl's face, only to have it stopped by the diminutive girl's own hand. With both of their hands occupied, the two combatants took a minute to stare the other down, cerulean orbs peering into what were now heterochromic eyes, one a dark brown and the other a light, almost white, pink. Naruto grinned his trademark foxy grin, and Neo frowned before smiling her own odd smirk, blinking in the process which changed the colors of her eyes. Kurama! Neo turned wide eyes to see the vulpine grin of her opponent's fox. Opening his maw, Kurama began channeling his own chakra, creating a miniature orb of concentrated red Bijou chakra. While downright tiny when compared to the full size Kurama could use when in his true Kyuubi form, this was still the devastating trademark attack of the nine-tailed beasts and their Jinchuriki, the Baijudama, tailed beast ball. Not wanting to see what such a menacing-looking attack could do, Neo acted quickly, grabbing Naruto's wrist and, leaning her weight onto her umbrella, put her feet on Naruto's abdomen, making her parallel to the ground. With a shove, Neo kicked off and sent herself shooting away from her blonde opponent and his fox, just in time as well, Kurama unleashing the pent-up chakra in a single condensed ball which flew just above Neo. With the ball being no bigger than a baseball, many didn't expect much of it. Of course, that notion flew out the window when the tiny ball impacted with the wall above the entrance. The doors, along with almost the entirety wall, were decimated in the blink of an eye, leaving behind only a few pebbles of building materials behind as the only sign that there had once been a wall there. The sound of the explosion and the concussive blast of air that followed were just as devastating. The sound took a second to catch up, and when it did, it hit as a physical force, the invisible waves hitting everyone and everything near the impact with enough force as to actually feel like a solid wall. The winds that kicked up due to the attack hit just as hard, destroying even more of the club. It was at this time that Vale's police force, no doubt backed by some huntsmen, decided to get involved, the sounds of sirens blaring in the distance. Not wanting to deal with said law enforcement, Torchwick called out, "Neo! Time to go!" The odd girl curtsied at Naruto before running to join her already escaping accomplices. Deciding that leaving the scene would be a good idea for him as well, Naruto turned towards the gaping form of Junior. Sorry about the wall. I'm not. Been a while since we've destroyed some stuff. Not now, Kurama. In a blur of speed, Naruto was gone, leaping across the rooftops to distance himself from the scene of destruction. Standing alone in the midst of what had once been a well-built and well-kept club, Junior could do nothing but stare in shock at what was left of his establishment. No more blondes in my club! As Naruto sped across the rooftops, laughing all the way, a set of piercing amber eyes stared at his retreating form. He could be useful to me, far more useful than this buffoon Torchwick. Now to find out just who you are and what motivates you, this'll be fun. With a smirk, the mysterious raven-haired woman sauntered her way to the car that one of Torchwick's men was driving. The effeminate man himself was near grinding his teeth in anger. Damned blonde! I swear the next time I see that mug of his I'm gonna kill him myself. No, you will not! Turning to look at his boss, Torchwick was clearly not happy about being told no. Why not? He could easily derail all of our plans. In response, the woman just smirked, her eyes beginning to glow, resembling fire itself. Do not worry about him, Torchwick. I will personally handle the situation. The crime boss huffed before pulling out a cigar and lighting it. Driver, get us back to base. Kurama, you know what I forgot to do? Naruto thought as he sat on the ship back to Beacon. Stirring from his nap, Kurama replied, actually kill the creep who will no doubt be a source of problems for us later on. Stroking his chin in thought, the blonde shook his head. Well, yeah, that. But something even more important than that. Okami Don Trauman. Kit. Yeah? I loathe you. Love you too, Kurama, love you too. Chapter 7. There were many ways Naruto could imagine spending his Saturday morning training with his team, sleeping, eating, pulling a prank on Carden, or possibly getting in trouble for the stunt he had pulled the night before at Junior's club. Oddly enough, he wasn't currently doing any of those things. Even more strange was the fact that Professor Ashbin seemed to know that the young blonde was involved with the incident in Vale, and yet was content to not ask any questions despite the many inquisitive stares he had gotten from the headmaster of Beacon. If our protagonist was not taking part in any of the aforementioned activities, then what exactly was he doing, you ask? Enjoying a soothing cup of tea at a cafe in Vale's Market District. With the sun barely having risen above the horizon a few short hours ago, it was still relatively cool, a gentle breeze carrying a morning chill to balance out the heat that radiated off the gaseous ball of flames in the sky. Seated on the second-floor balcony of the rather well-furnished eatery, Naruto allowed himself to relax into his chair, feeling the caress of the wind as it gently swayed his blonde mop of hair. As he did so, his cerulean orbs traveled to the young female who was actually the reason for his even being there in the first place. Sitting across from the shinobi in hiding was a pale-skinned raven-haired beauty. Dressed in her usual garb of purple/black stockings, white undershirt, black top, and her signature bow, Blake Belladonna took a sip of her tea, looking just as relaxed as her male friend. Many would be surprised to hear that it had actually been the young woman who had asked Naruto to accompany her to a cafe, knowing that the normally soft-spoken and monotone member of Team RWBY preferred her privacy and space away from most others. While it was true that she had begun to open up when around her teammates, even they knew that their friend and teammate had her limits, and would actively seek time away from them when she reached said limit of social interaction. The fact that she had asked Naruto, whom many knew to be loud, brash, and by all rights the opposite of Blake, was also odd and somewhat out of the norm for the raven-haired teen. Even the leader of Team NetPR was surprised when Blake sought him out and asked him to go with her on what amounted to a date in the eyes of most others. Of course, Naruto was far from being like most people, and being as romantically dense as he was, saw it as a friend asking another friend to hang out. Never mind the fact that she had asked just him and him alone to go with her. And so a short airship ride, a walk, and some small talk later they had found themselves quickly seated by the elderly lady who owned the cafe. The young Uzumaki had been confused when said owner had winked at Blake and said, Opposites attract, don't they? While the meaning was lost on our blonde hero, Blake was quick to understand the elderly woman's hinting and quickly attempted to hide the blush that was blossoming on her cheeks. This also happened to be the reason that the young woman had refused to make eye contact for the past few minutes, which had eventually led to there being a thick tension between the two teens, though Naruto had no idea why. "We really should have left a note for the others," came Naruto's voice in an attempt to break the tension. Blake replied in her usual monotone. "They'll be fine." You do know who you're talking about, right? Young? Nora?" Naruto chuckled. After a moment of thought and her mind conjuring the mental image of a panicked Yan and Nora literally turning Beacon upside down in search of them, while Ruby and Rin tried in vain to stop the two, the Ravenet put palm to face before muttering. "They're gonna burn the school down. The possibility of us returning to a ruined school aside, how come you asked me to come here? I never really took you as someone who would go out of her way to do something like this." The half-blood Uzumaki asked. "How the student of not one, but two perverts, one a self-proclaimed super pervert, is this dense when it comes to females is just baffling. If Jiraiya hadn't tricked you into losing your virginity, I'd swear you didn't know what sex is and how it works," Kurama grumbled through their link. The shrunken Biju had been content to enjoy the rare time of silence and peace that his partner's cat friend had brought with her, but having Naruto as a container made it very hard to stay quiet. Especially when said blonde was being his usual idiotic self. Without even batting an eyelash, Naruto grabbed Kurama by the scruff of the neck and tossed the cursing kitsune into the distance, much to the shock of his friend as well as the other patrons who were seated around them. Seeing Blake looking at him like he had just grown a second head, the blonde shinobi waved his hands uncaringly. "Don't worry, he'll be fine. Furball will just make his way back over here and try and get me back or something. I am going to fucking murder you, you blonde bastard." Deciding to not question the oddity that was the relationship between her friend and his fox partner, the young faunus decided to answer the previous question. "I need your advice." Naruto was slightly surprised to hear Blake's normally even-toned voice soften, her usually stoic face becoming downcast while her honey-colored eyes became a sea of warring emotions. This threw the teen male for a loop for a moment. It was a strange sight to see the always calm and in-control cat faunus almost fall apart. Whatever was bothering her was not just troubling her, it was almost tearing her apart. Then again, as a Jinchuriki, Naruto was no stranger to knowing that many people walked around wearing a mask, a facade to cover up the inner turmoil that was kept bottled inside and away from public eye. Shoot, he was practically the poster child for that. He had worn a mask for so long and played it off so well that he had to literally fight himself in order to fully realize who he was entirely, both the good and the bad. Coming back to the present, the blonde thought about the situation and instantly knew that there was only one thing that could be so consequential, that it was causing someone so strong-willed to act and look the way the young woman in front of him was. "Blake, don't doubt your teammates. They won't care that you're a faunus. They may be a little hurt that you kept it from them for so long, but that will pass. Ruby, Yang, and even Weiss are far better people than that." Taking a breath to steady herself and strengthen her resolve, Blake shook her head. "It's not just that. I know they wouldn't care about that, but Naruto, I used to be a part of the White Fang." Surprisingly, the blonde Uzumaki was quick to respond. "Why'd you leave?" Shocked at how quick her friend had responded and no doubt having thought that there would be more stunned silence on Naruto's end, Blake inquired. "What do you mean? Don't you care why I joined?" "What I dash." Cutting the cat girl off, Naruto shook his head. "Not important right now. Why did you leave?" Looking down at her cup of tea, Blake began rubbing her arm as she remembered the day she had left the faunus group. "I didn't want to use my skills for such a disgusting cause. The White Fang used to be a group that strived for faunus equality, but somewhere along the line that goal was twisted into something unrecognizable. When we started killing innocent people, I just couldn't do it anymore. It wasn't about equality anymore. It was about revenge at any price, even if that price was the lives of good innocent people." Tensing herself, the young woman prepared herself for the rejection, the accusations. Naruto had more than made it clear how he felt about the White Fang in its current form, and he would no doubt be disgusted to know that she had once upon a time been a part of that, assisting in the horrendous crimes that had been committed in the name of equality. And she wouldn't blame him for that. She was guilty of it all. She was a criminal who had attempted to run away, to start a new life away from all of that, even going so far as to register for Beacon in some vain attempt at redeeming herself. Who was I kidding? Life isn't a fairy tale. There is no redemption for someone like me, Blake berated herself. Okay then. Wide-eyed, the now revealed former member of the White Fang stared as her blonde companion relaxed into his chair, crossing his arms behind his head in an uncaring manner, seemingly unfazed by what most would consider to be a huge revelation. What do you mean okay then? Questioned Blake. Naruto shrugged. So you worked for the White Fang, so what? In the end you left, because you knew what they were doing is wrong. All this means is that you're a good person. For a moment, Blake was at a loss for what to say and could only stare in shock as the blonde captain of Team NNPR sat across from her with a small grin on his face. Slowly a smile formed on her pale face as she softly chuckled at the absurdity of it all. The almost stupidly simple logic Naruto had used to explain why he was wholly unfazed by the news that one of his friends had been a part of what amounted to a terrorist group was just that, stupidly simple. It was almost childlike, and if Blake didn't know any better, she would have called the blonde naive. For the first time in a while, the young fauness allowed herself to relax completely, to let down the walls she had raised in order to keep herself safe from those around her. It was refreshing to not constantly fear or worry over what people thought of you or how they react if they found out you were different. The feeling that she could just be Blake Belladonna, the teenage girl who just so happened to have cat ears and be going to school to become a huntress, was something she hadn't felt since she was little, far before she knew about or could even really understand the horrendous gap between faunus and human. We really should get back before Yang and Nora burn down the school or something. Naruto spoke, pulling Blake from her thoughts. Allowing a smile of true happiness and contentment to slip across her face, the Ravenette shook her head. They'll be fine for a little longer. In return, our displaced shinobi shrugged, just as content as his companion to enjoy the calm and easygoing mood that was brought on by the early Saturday morning. That mood was completely destroyed when the elderly owner of the cafe made her way to their table, and with a huge grin on her face asked, "So can I get anything else for the lovely couple?" Blake's face instantly lit up with a blush coloring her once pale cheeks, while Naruto was completely caught off guard and sputtered in both shock and embarrassment, mostly because what the woman had said caused him to look at his dark-haired companion in a different light. He hadn't really paid her that kind of attention, what with being around Pira and Yang. That wasn't to say Blake was any less attractive than them, but his teammate and the outspoken member of Team RWBY had features that had caught his eye more, Pira with her crimson locks and gentle nature, and Yang with her assets and bold nature that occasionally mirrored his own brash attitude. Blake, however, was different. His red-haired teammate was more of the regal and out of your league beauty, and Yang was that sexy, and I know it, good-looking. The dark-themed fauness who sat in front of him was almost refined in her beauty. Being so silent and liking to keep to herself made it easy for one to simply forget how attractive she was, with her porcelain skin, piercing amber eyes, and borderline sensual speaking voice. Remembering the only other girl he had known who was also closely connected to cats, a fellow Jinchuriki at that, Naruto had to wonder, why are all cat girls so hot? The wizened woman only laughed at the looks her statement had caused. Oh, to be young again. But what if he was kidnapped by spies? Maybe he's being held hostage by some terrorist group for ransom. Or maybe he was called to go on an epic quest to save a far-off kingdom from a fierce dragon. Nora, you need to stop putting so much syrup on your pancakes. Never! Under normal circumstances, the red-haired huntress in training of Team NNPR would have been laughing at the ridiculous situations that her fellow huntress was imagining, but her worry for her friend and captain's safety had taken precedent in her mind. Logically speaking, she shouldn't be worried, knowing full well that Naruto could more than take care of himself under most circumstances. However, that same logical part of her brain was quick to point out that while extremely powerful for his age, her blonde captain was not invincible by any means. He could still be hurt, he could still bleed, and even worse, he could still be killed. As that dreadful thought crossed her mind, the sound of someone knocking at their door pulled her from her worry-invoked daze. Hoping that it was their missing whiskered blonde come back from wherever he was, Pyrrha rushed to the door. Opening it and seeing a shock of sun-kissed blonde hair, a sigh of relief escaped her lips. That was, however, taken back when she opened the door fully, revealing that knocking at the door was not the blonde of Team NPR, but the blonde of Team RWBY. Before Pyrrha could even get a word in, a worried-looking Ruby stepped into view and spoke. "Is Blake with you guys?" Sighing, the taller redhead shook her head. "No, she's not. She's probably with Naruto then," Yam said with a shrug. "Naruto has also been missing as well," Ren said, joining the conversation. Clearly even more worried than before, Ruby interjected. "Wait, so Naruto is missing as well? He didn't say where he was going?" Seeing the sad shake of Pyrrha's head did nothing to ease the younger teen's fears. Now beginning to realize the oddness of the situation, Young became somewhat serious. "Blake didn't tell us anything either, and that's not like them to just up and leave without saying anything to someone." With a huff, the final member of the all-girl team jumped into the conversation. "Maybe we're just blowing this whole thing out of proportion. What if Blake asked Naruto to go with her somewhere or something?" The other occupants of the room turned to look at Weiss as if she had grown a second head. "What? Is it that weird that Blake and Naruto would actually get along?" Browsing through one of the many bookstores in Valle's shopping district, Blake began to feel an odd tingling in her nose. That tingle soon became that familiar feeling, and with a short intake of breath, the cat Faunus sneezed. Naruto popped his head over the shelf that stood between him and his friend and said, "Bless you." Rubbing her nose to get rid of the slightly itchy feeling left by the sudden sneeze, Blake replied, "Thanks." Returning to her browsing, the young woman continued on with her previous conversation. "So your godfather was an author? What's the title of one of his books?" Busy browsing through his own half of the bookshelf, Naruto shrugged. "His first book was The Tale of the Utterly Gutsy Shinobi. Sadly, it wasn't a huge hit or anything, but my parents liked it enough to name me after the main character." "So what about his other books?" The sound of something hitting the floor caused Blake to look over the shelf to see her blonde friend blushing as he picked up the books he had dropped. Putting the last of the dropped books back on the shelf, Naruto sheepishly began to chuckle and rub the back of his head. Well, they were a little different from his first book." Quirking a brow, the stoic girl asked, "How so?" Well, it was a series called Ika Ika." Just saying the name had Naruto feeling like he should bang his head on a wall or something. Jiraiya was many things, and he had been the male role model the blonde so needed at a time of his life that could have made or broke him. However, that didn't change the fact that at his roots, the famed sage of MT Mayaboku was an unrepentant and shameless pervert. "Make out?" Blake said with a blush lighting her cheeks as she realized what kind of books Naruto's godfather wrote. The title was simple, but no doubt did the job of describing exactly what the book entailed. Not being able to resist, Ruby allowed a snort to escape as she laughed at her teammate. "Come on, Weiss, Naruto and Blake getting along? That's like you and Nora becoming best friends or something." At that, the room's occupants laughed at the absurdity of such a notion. To be fair, the thought did seem far-fetched. As it was, the Schnee heiress had very little interactions with Team NPR outside of her odd friendship with their blonde captain and the few short talks she had with Pyrrha. The fact that, despite recent changes with her interactions with her team, and to a degree Naruto, Weiss was still pretty stuck up and people like Nora just bothered her on principle alone, played a huge part. Nora, while extremely bubbly and cheerful, held no love for the heiress of Team RWBY, something which was again not that surprising. Again, outside of their acknowledgement of each other during such times as this, they had nothing to say to the other. The fact that their personalities clashed so heavily and without there being a need for them to get along, the likelihood of the two young women actually becoming much more than acquaintances was pretty much zero. Putting fist to palm, the younger captain of Team RWBY called out, Looks like we'll have to assemble a search and rescue team to find our friends. For some reason, as the three members of each team began to go over a game plan of sorts, Pyrrha had the sinking feeling that Naruto and Blake would end up finding them in some form of trouble. For what had to be the dozenth time that morning, both Naruto and Blake sneezed within seconds of each other. They shared a look, both teens wondering what was causing them to sneeze like a kid with every allergy ever. Deciding that it was better left unexplored, the blonde shrugged as the two continued their stroll out into one of the less populated areas of Vale. The reason? None really. Blake had already browsed quite a number of bookshops and bought herself a small stack of the ones that had caught her eye. Naruto, meanwhile, had bought a small number of books that dealt with dust and its uses as well as its manufacturing. Sure, he had a number of jutsu under his belt from each element that could far outdo anything a dust user could do, but learning how to use the stuff should he ever have to wouldn't be a bad thing. With his own near-ocean-sized reserves and stamina, it was highly unlikely he'd ever run out of chakra, though. Compound that with the fact that he could draw upon nature chakra to bolster his reserves as well as borrow from Kurama, who had an almost limitless amount of chakra, and it would take days for the blonde to even come close to running out. Still, though, the concept of dust and how the people of Remnant used it intrigued our blonde protagonist. Thanks to dust, you didn't have to be aligned to a certain element to use it. In fact, anyone was more than capable of using every element, a feat shinobi were only capable of with decades of training or having access to a Kekkei Genkai. That didn't mean that the people of Remnant didn't align with certain elements more than others, like those of the elemental countries. He had yet to see anyone outside of Weiss really use dust, though, so at this point he was mostly going off of guesswork. Actually, I might have to talk to Princess later. She probably knows a lot about dust, and I did want to ask her about her glyphs, Naruto thought to himself. As powerful as the ability to draw your seals on thin air like that would be, I doubt it is something she would be able to teach you. These semblance powers are extremely unique to an individual, far more so than even the Kekkei Genkai of the shinobi. In fact, the only thing that children seem capable of inheriting from their parents is this aura and possible elemental alignment, Kurama chimed in. Being the pseudo-child of the famed Sage of Six Paths, the origin of both chakra and a multitude of Kekkei Genkai, the Biju had intimate knowledge of said topics. As such, the origin of aura and semblance intrigued the thousands of years old chakra construct due to the similarities and differences between the powers of the shinobi and huntsman. While Naruto and his foxy friend chatted through their mental link, Blake took the time to ponder her own thoughts that she had shoved to the back of her mind due to joy she had been feeling as she waltzed around Vale with her friend. That look usually means Naruto is talking with Kurama. But how? They're not saying anything out loud. Then again, Naruto did say that Kurama had been infused with his aura from birth, as some sort of experiment by his village. Wait, was he experimented on because he was a faunus? As the thought crossed her mind, the nagging curiosity began to gnaw at her, egging her on to get answers that would solve many of the mysteries that surrounded her blonde friend. Naruto, Blake said, simple in a bid to catch the blonde's attention. Seeing that she had both curious blue eyes and glaring crimson orbs staring at her, the young teen continued. Were you the only faunus in your village? The question actually caught Naruto off guard, not only because of how out of left field it came, but also because he hadn't thought anyone would ask something like that, content to know that he was a faunus, and that he came from a place called Konoha. If the blonde wanted to continue the half-truths trend that he had set thus far, he could say no, seeing as how both the Inuzuka and Aburame clans of his village were rather close to being faunus-like. Then again, he had been the only Jinchuriki of Konoha, for obvious reasons, and as such didn't exactly have the best childhood due to being treated like the faunus of Remnant as a pariah, something that wasn't entirely human, and so didn't deserve to be treated as one, a far cry from how the Inuzuka and Aburame clans were treated. Raking a hand through his hair and sighing in a way to make it seem like it was a sore subject when really he was just buying time, Naruto racked his brain. On one hand, he could get pretty close to the truth and let Blake know why he sympathized with the faunus, and why he didn't agree with the methods of the White Fang. On the other, he could be a proper shinobi and keep her at arm's length by telling a flat-out lie and simply dodging the question as best he could. TCH, you, a proper shinobi? You and I both know that you have never been a proper shinobi. It's why that one-eyed sensei of yours gave you your nickname, and also why you've been able to grow so strong and create bonds with people whom proper Nin would have simply left to die. On top of that, remember, there is a 99% chance of us never being able to go back there. What's done is done. Remnant and Vale are now our home. Kurama? Yeah, kid? Thanks. I don't know what I'd do without you. Probably dead or still being a dumbass. Disregarding his closest friend's snarky comment, knowing that it was simply how the Biju was, Naruto not only decided on what his answer to Blake's question was, but also he had realized how right Kurama was. Ever since he had come to Remnant, he had been searching of a way to get back to his home, to the life he had built there, while Kurama reminded him that the likelihood of that happening was all but zero. He had been telling half-truths and hiding a number of things from his team as well as Team RWBY in the hope that when he went back home, it wouldn't hurt him or them. But now, he really had no reason to hide behind lies and half-truths. Like Kurama had said, Vale was now his home. Albeit it probably wasn't the best idea to go up to his friends and tell them, "Hey, yeah, I'm actually a shinobi from a different dimension and or time period. Oh yeah, the cute fox I keep with me? Yeah, he's really a thousands of years old chakra monster that can pretty much destroy this place by accident." So while he wouldn't be getting rid of the half-truths entirely, he would start being a bit more honest and forthcoming, possible even hint at the truth, so that when the time came for him to eventually tell the truth, it wouldn't be such a huge bomb to drop. Yeah, I was the only one. My mom was also a faunus, but because of some issues during my birth I lost both her and my dad. Blake raised a brow at the odd way the blonde had said the word faunus, almost as if he was being a terrible liar, before she shrugged it off in favor of the realization that not only was he the only faunus of his home village, but he was also orphaned at a young age. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize how Blake began, truly apologetic that she had no doubt drawn up some deeply traumatic memories. Naruto merely shrugged. "You didn't know, and besides, I've made my peace with it. I didn't have the best of childhoods, but it shaped me into who I am today. Plus I know that my parents truly loved me to their dying breath, and that's all I need to know." The young cat faunus smiled at how mature the usually goofy blonde looked and handled the situation. It was a bit of an odd sight to see, Naruto being known more for his childishness than his maturity. But before her wasn't that same teen who had complained that the cafe didn't have ramen, but a man who had seen and done a lot, but still held tightly to his convictions and knew who he was as an individual. "Why the sudden question?" Naruto asked, curious what had brought on such a random inquiry. Turning to see that they had arrived at Vale's docks for both boats and airships, the two teens decided to relax for a bit and sat down at the edge of the concrete dock, their legs dangling over the surprisingly calm waters. Leaning back on her hands, Blake allowed her gaze to stray out to the waters that met the falling sun, creating a burst of purples and reds in a beautiful contrasting view. "You and Kurama looked like you were talking, but weren't saying anything. I know you can talk to foxes, but you two looked like you were talking to each other in your minds, which reminded that you had said Kurama had been an experiment by your village." Nodding his head as he leaned forward, resting his arms on his thighs as he shared in the view of the beatifically painted horizon, Naruto continued from where Blake had left off. "And you were wondering if I was experimented on because of my being a faunus, right?" Raising a brow yet again at the odd way in which her blonde friend seemed to say faunus, she nonetheless nodded, far more curious about how villages outside the control of the Four Kingdoms handled the topic of faunus. "Like I said, I didn't have the best of childhoods. Growing up, people would either treat me like I didn't exist or like I was some nuisance that they had to deal with, because they had no choice. Nobody told me why, and whenever I asked the leader of our village, one of the only people to give a damn about me, why, he just dodged the question, telling me they needed time," Naruto said with sorrowful look crossing his face. Just because he had come to terms with his past and the emotions that had been born of it, didn't make it any less shitty. Meanwhile, his raven-haired companion could only feel both anger and sadness. Anger that not only was someone as genuinely kind as Naruto having been treated like he didn't and shouldn't exist, but equally angry that no one told him why. To just leave him, a child no less, in the dark like that was cruel. It was for those same reasons that Blake was saddened, to hear how a child was left alone, no one to care for him, no one to tell him he was loved, no one to tell him that he mattered. As hard as she had it, at the end of the day she knew why she was treated differently, and even still she had other foreness, her family that cared for her. She was pulled from her thoughts when the blonde seated next to her sighed and continued. But to answer your question, no, I wasn't experimented on. Really, I wasn't abused, psychically at least. Wasn't till I was 13 that I found out why I was treated so differently. It wasn't for another 3 years that I found out why no one was allowed to touch me or even try to. That did raise some questions. Despite the people no doubt knowing of Naruto's status, he was never harmed physically, which was odd. If they so despised his existence, what had stopped them from taking out their disgust and aggression on him? When I turned 16, my godfather told me that my village's leader, the man I saw as a grandfather, had ordered that no one harm me or they would be put to death, and he had an almost round-the-clock guard of our most elite warriors to make sure the law was carried out. At first I wondered why I needed so much protecting. My godfather answered that too. My father had been our previous leader. Ironically, the people had loved him, and he had been poised to become one of our village's strongest warriors. But he had died the night I was born, defending our home. Blake couldn't help the scoff of disgust that escaped her lips. To love the father, but hate the son for something no one could control was abhorrent. It truly showed how narrow-minded some people could be. Laughing at the uncharacteristic scoff, Naruto nodded. Yeah, my reaction was kind of similar to that too. You were so angry that you tapped into my chakra and drew up 6 tails worth of it, and in your anger-induced haze almost murdered that pervert you call a godfather. Yeah, real similar to a derisive scoff, Kurama snarked. Deciding to ignore the shame he felt knowing that the Kyuubi was right, Naruto instead turned his gaze back out to the horizon as the hues of purple began to overtake the reds as the sun fell, the moon already having begun its own trek across the sky. It was a sight to see, something that literally happened every day, and yet was still so calming and beautiful. Stretching out his hands and allowing a yawn to escape his lips, the half-blood Uzumaki allowed himself to fall on his back, his arms resting behind his head and his legs still dangling over the wharf's edge. Blake drew her legs upwards and likewise turned her own gaze skyward as the moon brought with it the blanket of night, and the sky was lit with the twinkling glow of the distant stars. Silence reigned between the two, both more than comfortable enough to let the sounds of the water lapping at the concrete wall below them be the only noise to break that silence. Not minutes later that serenity and sense of peace was shattered when an explosion rocked the pier with the recognizable sounds of battle following soon after. Even still neither seemed all that bothered by the harsh sounds of bullet fire and steel clashing against steel. Instead, Naruto only turned to look at Blake with a grin. 5 Lin, that it's either your team or both of our teams involved in the fighting. The usually stoic teen only raised an eyebrow in response before shrugging. The likelihood of that being the case is slim to none. You're on. Poor Blake of course didn't know that betting against Naruto Uzumaki was never a smart idea. The blonde had the devil's luck and Lady Luck's blessing, and at the age of 14 had cleaned out enough casinos that he could have retired and never had to work again. Put simply, betting against the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was tantamount to betting that the sun wouldn't rise from the east. Leaping to their feet, the two calmly made their way to the sounds of fighting and explosions, seemingly in no rush. With casual ease, both teens leapt on top of one of the many stacks of shipping containers that dotted the wharf, and the sight below them had Blake sighing and Naruto grinning cheekily. There in the middle of the rather empty pseudo-arena was the notorious criminal, Roman Torchwick. Currently the cane-wielding man was doing his best to keep a certain red-haired javelin user at bay while also dodging the sweeping strikes that came from the scythe-wielding captain of Team RWBY. His accomplice, Neo, was merely dodging every strike and punch that came from the combined duo of Yang and Weiss, with that unnerving smile stretching across her pale face. It seemed that she was just toying with the Schnee heiress and Busta Brawler, while they tried their damnedest to land a single hit on the diminutive girl. Team NNPR's duo of best friends was meanwhile trying their best to land any sort of hit on Torchwick's boss, who was keeping them at bay and far from her with her outlandish control over dust, in this case being fire element dust. Nora seemed to have suffered quite a few hits from the stuff, the outer parts of her outfit being a little burned, while Rin was quickly running out of steam, having to dodge and maintain some form of attack while also helping out his childhood friend when he could. Pyrrha and RWBY seemed to be more than capable of keeping Torchwick on the ropes, if his look of irritation was anyone to go by. Weiss and Yang could use some help, and Naruto knew from experience that the only way to get the upper hand on the ice cream-themed girl was through speed. However, the biggest threat was no doubt the head honcho herself. Even Naruto would admit that Nora and Rin working as Team Pancake was a force to be reckoned with, and for this woman to so easily keep them at bay spoke volumes about her own skills. His mind working a mile a minute, Naruto finally decided on what he thought was the beat course of action. Blake, go help out Yang and Weiss. The only way to beat that girl is to outspeed her. Deciding to wait till after to ask how her blonde friend knew that, Blake nodded and quickly leapt into the fray, grabbing her weapon from her back and already moving to provide her teammates with much-needed backup. Pulling out his own weapon, Naruto was soon jumping into the midst of the fighting himself. Vanishing from normal human eyesight, the blonde made a beeline for his own teammates, who looked ready to collapse any second now. Blurring through a series of one-handed hand seals, the Jinchuriki appeared in front of the downed duo of friends and called out, "Suetun, Suijin Hiki, water release! Water formation wall!" To everyone's surprise, a massive torrential wall of water rose around Naruto, Rin, and Nora, protecting the three teens from the stream of flames that had been aimed at them. In the face of such an insurmountable defense, the raging flames sputtered and died, turning into vapor and clouding the area with a fog. If I'm gonna stop hiding all the time, I guess it's okay to start busting out the jutsu, right, Kurama? 'Bout damn time, Kit! Let's show these people how we do it. What happened next had everyone in the area holding their ears to block out the screeching noise that began to grow louder and louder with each passing second. In seconds, strong winds began to blow throughout the wharf, dispelling the fog in seconds and revealing a grinning Naruto holding something that none of the spectators had ever seen before. Spinning wildly and held above of his head was what looked to be an overly large shuriken made entirely of pure wind. At the center of the deadly-looking attack was a glowing blue sphere that sat in the palm of the blonde Jinchuriki's hand. With a casual heave, Naruto tossed the violently whirling attack and called out, "Futon, Raisin Shuriken, Wind Release, Spiraling Shuriken!" Fearing what such a devastating-looking attack could do if it actually hit, the wide-eyed woman dodged out of the way of the oncoming shuriken, and even still the near gale force winds that surrounded Orb of Death were able to produce cuts in her dress and even cut shallow trenches into her calves. As the spinning attack flew past everyone and into the waters in the distance, Naruto finally allowed his control over it to be cut, and the consequences of that action had everyone staring in awe at the results. The winds that had been the makeup of the attack rushed outwards, creating waves that slammed into the concrete barriers of the pier, and even then, the winds managed to whip into those on the battlefield with enough force that they had to actually exert force so as to not be carried away. Meanwhile, as the core of the attack detonated, blades of wind capable of cutting into an enemy on an atomic level slammed into the waters below, churning out colossal waves that further flooded the already wet wharf. Around them, the sounds shipping freights scraping across the ground as they were forcibly pushed back by the concussive waves of air echoed across the wharf. Finally, as the backlash of what Naruto had just unleashed receded, the villains decided that fleeing was the best course of action, hopping into a nearby helicopter that was quickly attempting to escape the dangerous blonde. Uzumaki Naruto did not give up that easily though, and was already speeding through another set of seals. Right as it looked like the group of criminals had escaped, he unleashed a torrent of flames from his mouth. "Katon, Karyu Enden, Fire Release, Fire Dragon Flame Bullet!" On board the escaping heli, the group of criminals began to panic as the roaring maw of dragon made entirely of flames closed in on them, intent on bringing them to a burning grave. Rushing to one of the side doors, the mysterious leader conjured up her own wall of flames, the fearsome inferno that had taken on a draconian image slamming full force into her own blazing attack. The resulting explosion rocked the escape vehicle and the nearby shipping containers, and yet still they managed to escape, however not unscathed. That boy. I need him on my side even more now. He is far too powerful to not, and I will have him, one way or another. Sighing as he watched the escaping hunk of metal, Naruto shook his head. This is gonna come back to bite me in the ass, I just know it. More than likely, however, at least they now fear you and know that messing with you or those around you would not be a smart move on their part. It may stop them and help us later on down the road, Kurama spoke. Turning around, the blonde was quick to realize the amount of devastation he had caused with only 3 attacks, none of which being his strongest either. What made it worse were the dumbfounded looks his own team and Team RWBY were sending him. What the hell was that, Foxy? Yan shouted as she flailed her arms about in a manner none too unlike her younger sister. I found you, RWBY! Said Scythe Wielder screamed in shock. Penny! What are you doing here? Soon after, the blaring sounds of sirens along with the bright lights of searchlights flooded the pier. Maybe I should have just stuck to the whole half-truth thing. You and I both know that this is way more fun though. Says the fox whose idea of fun is destroying villages. Not my fault you ninja and make everything so fragile. This is gonna be a long night. Chapter 8. You know, I'd have thought most people wouldn't want to fight me after my little display at the docks. Naruto called out cockily to his sparring partner. Said partner, the red-haired beauty of Team NNPR, shrugged. It just gives me more reason to want to spar with you, so I can improve. And there it was. The reason, or at least one of them, that the blonde Jinchuriki found himself attracted to his teammate and partner. She wasn't like most people who, upon attaining a certain level of strength, became content. No, Pira was always striving to better herself in some capacity, be it her battle prowess or even herself as a person. And it wasn't for some selfish or contrived reason. No, the young battle prodigy simply wanted to be a better person for the sake of it, and to better help those around her. To Naruto, who was willing to lay down limb and life for those he considered his precious people, it was an endearing quality. Sure, he knew that Jiraiya, Tsunade, and even Kakashi were more than willing to and had in the past put themselves in harm's way to protect him, but to have that same level of loyalty and caring returned to him by someone his own age and of the opposite sex was new and inviting. Even amongst his peers, the rookie 12, he had never felt that they would go above and beyond should push come to shove. Even when they found out he housed the chakra monster responsible for almost wiping Konoha off the map, he felt no closer to them. If anything, they were more likely to keep him at arm's length. To their credit, it wasn't out of fear of him, but more fear of what would happen in the worst-case scenario, which as shinobi one always had to be prepared for. Stretching out his limbs and pumping chakra throughout his body in preparation for what would no doubt be a blood-pumping spar, Naruto chuckled. Alright, so any rules or restrictions? Pira followed her partner's example and began to go through her own series of stretches. Well, I'd like to ask you to at least try as hard as you did down on the pier, but I don't think it'd be a smart idea. The blonde had to give the green-eyed huntress to be credit. While he could underpower his jutsu so that they weren't as lethal or as destructive as they had been on that night, it still wouldn't lessen the fact that he would be breathing flames that took on the form of a mythical beast. Sparring with other shinobi meant that you at least had a vague idea of what your opponent could do, especially if you knew what village they hailed from. Here in the world of Remnant, where the term ninja invoked the image of people sneaking around in black pajamas, no one would guess that Naruto's version of a ninja meant giving the finger to the laws of physics and telling Newton to shove an apple where the sun don't shine. As such, for anyone to be prepared to properly fight Naruto, they would either have to fight him enough times to know what to expect or be given a cheat sheet with all of his attacks and what they did on it. Pira, being Pira, had obviously decided to go for the former. Alright, so I'll keep it small scale and go from there. That alright? Switching Milo into its javelin form while gripping Akko with her other hand, Pira gave a firm nod. Seeing that his friend was in her battle mode, Naruto decided that he'd give the invincible girl a harsher run for her money and pulled out Hi no Ishi. He had also realized that he hadn't really been using the weapon, which was a shame seeing as he had went through the trouble of making it himself with Kurama's help. Resolving to start using the Shikujo more often, Naruto's normally bright blue eyes hardened and gained a frosty cold glint to them. He wanted Pyrrha to grow stronger just as much she herself did, and to do that meant he couldn't fool around. No, he was going to put her through her paces and then some. With an unseen and unheard signal, the two were off in a burst of speed. Naruto, being far faster than Pyrrha, managed to cross more than half the field in the time it had taken her to cover a third of it, and was already aiming a horizontal swing at her abdomen. Having sparred with her blonde leader numerous times by this point, the young woman was more than prepared for this and brought up a code just in time. What she wasn't prepared for was the amount of force behind the swing. Having Nora on her team, Pyrrha was no stranger to having to evade or defend against hits that could shatter concrete and dent steel. However, the swing from Naruto had felt like she had just tried to stop a speeding train. Needing time to reorient herself with the increased strength and come up with a battle plan, the redhead warrior attempted to give herself some breathing room by shoving Naruto and his Shikujo aside with her shield. She followed this up by quickly shifting Milo into its rifle form and firing a succession of bullets aimed at the QB container's abdomen. Again, Pyrrha was caught flat-footed when, in a show of grace, Naruto easily spun out of the way of the bullets and shoved a palm into her sternum. Her mind had no time to comprehend what happened in the next few seconds, and the next thing she knew was that she had a lovely view of the ceiling and was struggling to get air into her lungs. A minute or so later, and having finally managed to get some much-needed oxygen into her system, the green-eyed teen struggled to her feet, using Milo as a crutch. "You wanted me to fight at the level I did on the pier. It's only gonna get harder from here on in." Naruto twirled his staff. Only now was Pyrrha realizing what she was up against. She always had an inkling that her whiskered captain was holding back in their fights and that he was far stronger than he let on. To be fair, she wasn't going all out either, not having used her semblance yet, and it seemed that Naruto knew this and was hinting that to even pose a challenge, she would have to give it her all. Using her aura to numb the pain until it was a dull throb, Pyrrha looked up with her light green eyes gaining their own edge to them. Smirking as the redhead readied herself for another round, Naruto rushed to meet her, intent on making his partner take this seriously. Swinging his Shikujo with an almost casual ease, the blonde Uzumaki raised a brow as instead of blocking the strike with her shield, Pyrrha had instead opted to catch the blunt weapon with Milo in short sword form. Feeling Hi no Ishi suddenly gain what felt like several hundred pounds, Naruto realized too late what was happening and received a code to the face for his troubles. Pyrrha expected to hear the harsh crack of bone breaking, but was instead met with a face full of smoke. Waving away the small gray cloud, the redhead was shocked to see a grinning Naruto casually twirling his staff, looking like he had never moved from his spot. Already knowing that his sparring partner would be extremely curious as to how he had managed to escape a hit that would have broken his jaw and nose, Naruto molded his chakra into the needed form and without the need for seals, summoned a doppelganger who stood at his side, the same grin stretching across its own whiskered cheeks. "This is my signature technique, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, which roughly translates to shadow clone technique. It lets me create as many copies of myself as I want, and each is more than capable of dealing out some damage. But they can only take a single hit before popping, which I still haven't figured out how to fix." While Naruto was no doubt leaving out a lot of the more technical aspects of the technique, Pyrrha understood the gist of it. Her captain could clone himself at will, and while highly brittle, they were armed with the same knowledge as the original. The only question now was how strong were they in comparison to their creator. Her analytical mind already racing, the young huntress in training theorized that it was highly unlikely that they were just as strong as their creator, as not only would that defy at least 10 different laws of nature and physics, but it would also be highly unfair. However, Naruto had said that it was his signature technique, which meant he no doubt could control how strong each copy was along with all of the other aspects of. In the end, this just meant this spar was going to be a lot harder than she first thought. Seeing as how Pyrrha had decided to start using her semblance, and with the hardened glint in her eye, Naruto knew that he was about to find out how his friend had earned the title of the Invincible Girl. Then again, he wasn't called Konoha's most surprising ninja for nothing either. Your semblance is really impressive, Naruto, Pira said as she wiped her face of the dirt and grime that had been the result of her spar with her friend and captain. The blonde leader of NNPR only rose a brow. Says the girl who can control metal? Having never seen his partner use her semblance seriously, he had been surprised to find out that she could control it to a great enough degree that she could almost close the gap between them. If she wanted to slow him down, all she had to do was make his weapon, kunai, or his other hidden ninja gear weigh 100 pounds or more. If she needed to avoid a swing, she could just push him away by using the same method. She could even direct her own weapons with her control over polarity, and use a ko as a sort of heat-seeking frisbee of death. In a world full of metal, Pira's semblance was almost unfairly powerful. But still, even she had her limits. Naruto had found that the red-headed warrior needed to tag the item she wanted to control either by touching it or having it be within a small area around herself, the latter being far more taxing as she needed to exert her aura outwards, which took quite a bit of concentration and effort. The other problem was her aura reserve. She didn't have an endless supply of the stuff, and while running out of aura could not cause one to collapse or even die, it did leave the user fatigued. Even still, Pira seemed to know her limits very well and was good at planning out her moves, even in the heat of battle, which combined with her own natural talent and skill and her almost Hax-level semblance, made for a rather deadly combination. Fair enough, but I can't create an almost endless supply of corporeal clones or use wind as a weapon, the sweaty teen replied. Naruto just childishly pouted and stuck his tongue out at her in reply, to which both had a good laugh at. As the sun slowly began its downward trek across the sky, there was a lapse of silence between the two, which neither seemed all that bothered by. Remembering that there was something that had been bothering her ever since the whole fiasco in the cafeteria, and with the night on the pier adding onto it, Pira decided to voice her concerns. Hey, Naruto? Hearing said blonde offer a hum in confirmation, she continued. What was Konoha like? Turning his gaze from the view, the displaced shinobi seemed genuinely shocked that someone had asked about his home village. Seeing the look of surprise hurt the redhead, knowing that it meant he hadn't expected anyone to show interest in the place he was born, to show interest in his past and where he came from. However, that surprise shifted as ocean blue eyes turned back to gaze at the sunset as a fond smile stretched across whiskered cheeks. It was a lot different from Vale. The village was surrounded by nature, and there was never a lack of greenery. It wasn't called the village hidden in the leaves for nothing after all. But my favorite spot in the village was the Hokage Monument, this huge mountain that overlooked Konoha and had the faces of each our leaders carved into. Whenever I needed somewhere to think, I would climb up it and sit on our fourth leader's head, the Yondaime Hokage, who happened to be my father. Pira found herself lost in the oceanic blue eyes of her friend as he described his home, but was pulled out of it when her interest was piqued upon hearing Naruto mention his parents. Your dad was one of your village's leaders? Having lost himself in memories, Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. Yeah, he was. His name was Minato Namikaze. Having intended to get to know her friend and his past even more, Pira was instead finding herself with even more questions than she had before. But I thought your last name was Uzumaki? Naruto frowned in thought. It is. My dad made a name for himself by inventing two of our village's most powerful attacks and using them to wipe out a whole battalion of enemy forces, which is one of the reasons he was chosen to be the fourth. But because of that, he earned himself some enemies, and the policies he was trying to implement as leader got him enemies in the village. When him and my mom died, everyone thought it was best I not keep the name Namikaze so I wouldn't have to worry about assassins or people trying to use me as a political pawn. Seeing as it was quite a bit of information to take in, Naruto paused and gave the redhead time to think and go over what she had just heard. He didn't mind telling her about his parentage due to the fact that the name Minato Namikaze and his feared reputation as the Konoha no Kiroi Senko, Yellow Flash of Konoha, meant nothing here. There was no Iwa or Kumo Nin who feared and hated him here in Remnant. There were no nin period. This also meant being the son of the infamous Yandere meant just as little, which was fine with Naruto. He had grown up an orphan, and even when he did find out who his dad was, it did nothing to change who he had come to be, a sentiment shared by those who truly cared for the blonde Jinchuriki. Meanwhile, Pyrrha was trying to wrap her mind around the fact that, by all rights, her whiskered leader was the closest thing his village had to royalty. Seeing how powerful he already was at 17, and having seen beforehand how charismatic and determined the young man was, she had no doubt Naruto had been poised to follow in his father's footsteps and take over as this Hokage. Wanting to shift the conversation from such a somber topic, Pyrrha decided to ask another question. What about your mom? Almost instantly the unnaturally, on him at least, serious look flipped and was replaced by a smile filled with warmth and eyes burning with fondness. My mom was named Kushina Uzumaki. A lot of people say that while I look almost exactly like my dad, I got my personality from her. She had long fiery red hair, violet eyes, and well, people say she was one of the most beautiful women in our village. Is that why he's always staring at my hair? Pyrrha pondered. Naruto had thought he was being sneaky about it, but she would occasionally catch him gazing at her hair, especially when she wore it down. If he did it out of remembrance of his mother, who was apparently strikingly beautiful, it was a big compliment for her. Nonetheless, it warmed her heart to see her friend look so happy at the memory of someone so undoubtedly wonderful. Really, both of Naruto's parents sounded amazing, his father the powerful and no doubt charismatic leader, and his mother, the beautiful and strong-willed woman to complement him. It was almost like a fairy tale with how perfect their family would have been. Enough about me though. What about you, Pyrrha? Said. Teen blushed upon realizing that she had been staring at Naruto's face. What about me? Shaking his head with a chuckle, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki replied. Well, what about your home? What was it like at Sanctum? The flinch that followed the last part of Naruto's question would have been missed by most people. But being a shinobi and having had Konoha's greatest spy master as his godfather, and sensei had left the half-blood Uzumaki with the skill to be able to pick out even the most suppressed of reactions. The need to push for answers never arose though. Sanctum wasn't as enjoyable for me as it was for others. Seeing Naruto's raised brow and concerned eyes, Pyrrha mustered up the strength to continue. I performed excellently in almost every area, and well, you know that I earned myself the title of the Invincible Girl, and while my family was proud it made it hard for me to find friends. Everybody either didn't talk to me because they thought I was too far out of their league, or they wanted something from me, like I owed them something. Well, that's dumb. That one simple phrase broke Pyrrha out of her sullen walk down memory lane. While she had long since come to terms with the hurdles placed in front of her due to her status and fame, she never thought she'd meet someone so unaffected by it. Weiss, the heiress to one of the most wealthy families in Vale and Remnant as a whole, had almost begged her just to be her partner on their first day at Beacon, because of her own reputation. Even Rin and Nora had seemed a little surprised to find out that they were on the same team as her. Naruto, however, simply didn't seem to care. Naruto, she uttered. I've never really cared for titles or all that other fancy crap. To me, you're not the Invincible Girl or whatever, you're Pyrrha Nikos, my friend and partner, who just happens to be really strong and beautiful. As the last part of his little speech left his mouth, Naruto's eyes widened. Shit. Damn you, brain. Damn you, red hair. In that instant, Pyrrha's face was lit by a blush dusting her cheeks. Being told she was beautiful was nothing new to her, and Naruto had already let it slip once before, and just like that time, it was the sincerity with which it was said that caused her to blush. Or maybe it was the entire moment. Here she was getting to know her partner and, now, closest friend in a way that she had never really been able to do with anyone outside of her family. It was almost surreal for her, finally getting what she had so longed for since her rise to fame. And with someone so uniquely himself. While not normally a gambling person, the red-haired beauty was willing to bet that there was no one like Naruto, as cheesy as that may sound. Wait. We don't have a shipping name yet. And with that, the hyperactive team member of Team NPR shattered both the awkward tension and the budding romantic one with ease by seating herself between her teammates, with a look of deep concentration on her face. "Nora! I told you to leave them alone!" came the cry of the final member of Team NPR. "But run! We can't have a pairing without a proper shipping name!" While both Naruto and Pira stared in shock and embarrassment, Ren simply sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Nora, what have I told you about that?" With a childish pout, the eccentric teen replied, "To wait until they're an actual couple." Realizing that it was Nora, Naruto and Pira recovered from their shock and began to laugh at the oddity that was their teammate. At the same time, the blonde leader came to the conclusion that it had been a while since they hung out as a team as friends, and hailing from the ninja village that emphasized teamwork and camaraderie above all else, that was a no-no. Standing to his feet, Naruto brushed off his pants and jacket. "Team! Seeing as it's Saturday and we've finished our work for the day, as your captain I declare today a team bonding day." Nora cheered at the declaration, while both Ren and Pira simply smiled, the redheads being more noticeable as she absent-mindedly gazed at her friend. That smile soon turned into giggling though as the blonde Jinchuriki looked at their current attire. Both Ren and Nora were still in their school uniform, while he and Pira were in their battle clothes and looked and more than likely smelled rather foul. After a shower and change of clothes, that is. Naruto chuckled. A freshly showered and casually dressed Team NPR made their way through the streets of Vale, the team laughing at the plight of their captain. How does Vale seriously not have one damn ramen stand? Garbed in a set of black jeans, a burnt orange shirt with the Uzumaki family crest emblazoned in black on the chest area, and his old Konoha headband tied loosely around his neck, Naruto childishly fumed at his so far futile attempts at finding a simple ramen stand. "I don't think we'd find one in the shopping district, Naruto," a still chuckling Pira responded. Dressed in a pair of form-fitting blue jeans with a simple black top that bore her own unique symbol at the bottom left portion of it, and her crimson locks done up in a simple ponytail, the statuesque teen still managed to turn quite a number of heads, not that she was paying attention to that. Prancing around in her pink skirt and white blouse with her insignia printed in a matching pink on her chest, Nora garnered her own fair share of stares, mostly due to the fact that despite her age she was acting like a 5-year-old on a sugar high, seemingly ignorant to both the stares and her captain's plight. Ren, despite his friend dancing around singing something she referred to as the dance of the sugar plum fairy, and his leader whining like a spoiled child who didn't get the candy they wanted, seemed unsuitably at peace. He had likewise gone with the simple style of clothing his teammates had and was dressed in a pair of white jeans and a forest green hoodie, his flowery symbol stitched into the pouch of the thin clothing article. Finally deciding to give up on his search for his own personal ambrosia, again, Naruto sighed. "Well, there goes my idea. Anyone got anything they want to try?" No doubt wanting to give his childhood friend something to occupy her lest she cause some form of trouble, the long-haired male spoke up. "There's a weapons shop up ahead. We can see if there's anything interesting in there." Seeing as how Beacon didn't provide its students with ammo or anything, the rest of the team agreed, needing to stock up on their own preferred ammo of choice. Despite the seemingly unassuming exterior, Team and NPR were a little surprised to see that the interior of the store was tediously well kept and organized with a wealth of variety from the basic and mundane to the eccentric and expensive. "Welcome to Achievement Hunter's Weapon Shop. Anything that cuts, pierces, or my personal favorite goes boom, we got it. My name's Jack, how can I help ya?" Blinking at the bearded man that stood in front of them, the 4 teens found themselves at a loss for words. His entrance and subsequent speech had come so abruptly that not even Nora knew how to respond to the situation. Of course, that soon came to an end when the word boom clicked in the equally eccentric girl's mind, and with a squeal she was gone, no doubt to get ammo for Magnahild. With a sigh, Ren ventured off after her to make sure she didn't blow up the store or break anything that would end up costing him in the long run. Coming out of their own stupor, both Pira and Naruto blinked, the blonde speaking up. "Actually, yeah, I was wondering if you guys had any of these." Reaching into the singular weapons pouch, the only one that was visible at least, Naruto showed the store worker a spool of his ninja wire as well as a kunai and shuriken. Eyeing the odd choice of weaponry, the large man hummed in thought whilst rubbing his beard. Well, kid, I'll say this, you got an interesting taste in weapons. But like I said, if it's sharp and pointy, we carry it, so yeah, we have a few packs of those shuriken and kunai. The wire, on the other hand, I'm afraid that's not something we carry. I can check and see if we got anything similar, though. Seeing Naruto's shrug, the apparent lover of all things explosive jerked a thumb to a shelf in a corner. Well, we got our kunai and shuriken over there, so feel free to browse while I see what I can do. Taking the shop worker's advice, Naruto made his way over to the shelf to see what they had while Pyrrha ventured off to see what else the store had to offer. On the way to the aisle, the blonde passed by another customer, but he was unable to see her face as her back was turned to him, though he was struck by a strange sense of familiarity as he glanced at the stranger's long raven locks and petite build. The teen shinobi was tempted to simply brush the feeling off, but both Kurama and Jiraiya had drilled it into him to always trust his instincts, no matter how far-fetched they may seem. As he browsed through the varying types of kunai the weapons store had to offer and simultaneously kept an eye on the nearby stranger, Naruto wanted to bash his head in as the person turned and revealed a set of burning amber eyes. Browsing through a shelf full of various vials of basic dust was the woman who was supposedly the real leader of Torchwick and his whole outfit. The situation went even further downhill as the woman turned and, with wide eyes, stared straight at the frustrated teen. What in the 9 circles of hell did I do in a past life to deserve this, Kami? The booming laughter of Kurama echoed throughout the recesses of his mind. Ha ha ha. This is just priceless. Can we just kill her now? Pretty please? The blonde Jinchuriki was sorely tempted to say yes to his tenant. However, the ensuing battle would more than likely leave the entirety of Vale's shopping district in shambles. Plus, there was a high risk his team would try and get involved, and he knew that they were no match for this woman who had managed to defeat both Ren and Nora with utter ease. No, to defeat her he'd have to bring out the big guns and really let loose. Spoil sport. Naruto was stopped from giving his furry partner a retort when the woman sauntered up to him with a sultry smirk stretching across her flawless face. The smoky voice that followed sounded almost like sex in verbal form. I didn't think I'd run into you here of all places. Yeah, I didn't think a crime boss like you was one for shopping like normal people. Naruto bit back. The raven-haired woman seemed unperturbed by this and just continued to gaze into his sapphire orbs with her own searing amber eyes. The only crime boss is that buffoon Roman. Even then he's a poor excuse for one. Before Naruto could reply, his Biju decided to deliver some rather shocking news. Kid, wait. Remember how I said that there were only 2 negative auras that night? Yeah, what of it? With a grim look stretched across his face, the fox dropped the bomb. She's not one of them. The muscles in Naruto's jaw tightened visibly as he gazed down at the much smaller woman who seemed far too calm for the current situation. Meanwhile, his mind raced as it tried to cope with the new information. Kurama's negative emotion sensing ability was never wrong, ever. There was no feasible way for even the other-tailed beasts to trick it. What's your game? Naruto spoke at last in a tone that showed he wasn't in the mood for playing around. Again the woman seemed not at all bothered by the change in demeanor, only raising a singular brow. You don't expect a woman to give away all her secrets to a random stranger, do you? It was worth a shot, Naruto admitted. Well, we don't have any of that wire, but… Jack, the store worker, took note of the situation and smiled. Hey! I didn't know you knew this guy Cinder. Were you the one who told him about us? The now-named Cinder simply smirked and spoke without tearing her gaze away from Naruto's. No. Unfortunately, we were both a little preoccupied during our last few meetings. Oblivious to the tension of the moment, the bearded man shrugged. Alright, well, I'm gonna go make sure that orange-haired friend of yours doesn't break anything. I didn't like the way she was looking at some of our higher-caliber explosive rounds. When he felt that Jack was sufficiently out of earshot, Naruto spoke. Cinder? Cinderfall, she replied a little too easily. Uzumaki Naruto. This only seemed to make Cinder happier. So my research was correct after all. You're a shinobi. Naruto's eyes narrowed dangerously. How the heck do you know that? He wasn't so much worried about her, or anyone for that matter, knowing about his previous occupation, but he had thought that there would be no other way for people to find out unless he personally revealed it to them. Apparently he had been wrong. It was a lot harder to find than you'd think, but the way you said your name confirmed my suspicions. I had to dig through countless ages-old tomes that dated back to before even the discovery of dust and the apparent birth of Grimm. But in one ancient scroll I found a passage that spoke of a people who could do the impossible, defy gravity by walking up walls, walk on water as if it were solid ground, and even command the very elements themselves. They were called shinobi and used something called chakra to perform all of these almost godlike feats. Wait, if what she says is true then. Your silver-haired sensei Sharingan didn't send us to a different dimension, it sent us into the future, the far future. Not allowing the shock to show on his face, Naruto spoke. And why go through all the trouble? So you can find my weakness? Almost instantly Cinder's smirk fell, replaced by a decidedly much more serious look. No. I admit I was highly intrigued by your attacks as well as the fact that you called out your attacks in what most would consider a dead language. However, what I want most is for you to join me, and to that end I want to know as much as I could about you and your powers. At hearing the possible villainous want for him to help her, a single blonde brow was raised. You want me to help you? Regardless of your relationship with that creep Torchwick, I'm not so easily inclined to believe you're up to anything good. That sultry smirk once more found its place on the raven-haired woman's face. That's not something we can exactly discuss here, but soon we will. Until then, just think about my offer. Blue orbs watched as the petite woman calmly and enticingly strutted out of the shop. Kurama? Yeah, Kit? What do you think? The massive chakra construct offered a mental shrug. Well, she doesn't have that red hair you like so much, but she seems like she'd offer a good romp in the NOT in that way, Baka Kitsune. Once again the sounds of laughter reverberated throughout the halls of Naruto's mind. Ha ha! Priceless. Once the Kitsune allowed his last vestiges of laughs to pass, he took on a much more serious demeanor, but in all honesty I'm not too sure. We still don't know enough about our own situation here to really be able to just jump into anything. The only things we can be for sure about now are, she's got some hidden agenda, but isn't necessarily evil. We're more than likely a few dozen millennia in the future, not a different dimension like we thought, and there's something going on here that only a select few are privy to. Raking a hand through his blonde locks, Naruto sighed. So pretty much the standard stuff, huh? Seeing the worn-out expression on his container's face, Kurama decided to offer some good news. At least this way we can find out what happened after that scarecrow sensei of yours pulled off that Kamui, authority of the gods. If that woman could find old scrolls detailing the shinobi, there's bound to be others laying around with more specific info on those events. Looking many years older than anybody his age had a right to be, Naruto allowed his eyes to crinkle as he offered a small smile at his tenant's words. That's true. And at least we now know for sure that whatever Akatsuki, Dawn/Daybreak, had planned with the Biju failed without us there. The blonde Uzumaki was torn from his thoughts when he felt a hand on his shoulder. Turning around, he was a little surprised to see the concerned looks of his teammates. Are you okay, Naruto? Pira asked, having been the one to put her hand on his shoulder. Looking at the genuinely concerned looks of his team, his friends, Naruto shook his head and gave off a bright smile. Yeah, I'm fine, guys. So what did you find? Chapter 9. So you're telling me that this little slip of paper is capable of holding all of this? The bearded store owner known as Jack stared incredulously at the unfurled scroll that lay before him. Team NNPR had purchased far more ammo and dust than they had really planned for, and they had no way to carry it all back with them to Beacon. Luckily for the teens, Naruto was well versed in the creation of storage seals and usually kept anywhere from 5 to 12 empty storage scrolls on him for just such an occasion. Of course, the large man that was apparently one of the many co-owners of Achievement Hunter's weapon shop was skeptical of a simple scroll's ability to carry what amounted to about 100 or so pounds of ammunition. Really, anyone would be highly skeptical if they were told a scroll could hold such a hefty load, more so if they were told that the unassuming piece of paper was capable of doing so thanks to the writing on it bending time and space to create a pocket dimension where the items in question would be kept. Fuinjutsu is so cool, Tebeo, Naruto thought to himself with a grin as he finished placing each of his teammates' respective rounds in their own pile on top of the scroll. Placing his hands on the scroll, the Jinchuriki pumped a small amount of chakra into each of the sealing matrices inscribed into the paper, and in a puff of white smoke the items were gone, leaving only the scroll laying on the floor and a flabbergasted Jack. "Well, now I think I've seen it all. That's a pretty neat trick, kid," the bearded man praised. "Those would be extremely useful to have around the shop." Naruto began to roll up the scroll. "Actually, I've been working on a version of these that others besides me would be capable of using. I have a prototype with me, but haven't had the chance to really try it out." This seemed to make Jack extremely happy. "Well, no time like the present, right? Bust it out, Blondie!" Naruto grimaced. In truth, he really had been working on a version of the basic storage seals that could be activated by aura users so that he could give a scroll or two to his teammates for them to use. The only problem was figuring out how to compensate for the difference between chakra and aura. The two energy sources were similar yet so different. Chakra was comprised of both yin and yang, the physical aspect from the body and the spiritual aspect from the mind. It was literally someone's life force, which is why chakra exhaustion left its victims in a bedridden state, and why it was also possible for someone to die if they used up all their chakra. Aura, on the other hand, was, well, Naruto really didn't know for sure. He and Kurama had theorized that the people of Remnant had somehow had their chakra separated, their spiritual aspect giving birth to semblances and their physical half becoming what was known as aura. This meant that they could freely use up either of the two without worrying about little more than fatigue. Really, the only way it would be possible for someone to die from overusing their energy would be if they used their semblance and aura simultaneously till there was nothing left. Still, the unique situation this presented for Naruto and his seals was trying to figure out how to get the matrix to respond to just the physical aspect of chakra, which involved having to tear apart and scrutinize every single minute detail of the entire seal, and, in an art where even the smallest mistake could be costly, this wasn't an easy task. However, the prototype he had on him had been tested quite a number of times, and the success rate was pretty high, at least with Naruto doing it. He had yet to actually have an aura user try it out. Throwing caution to the wind, Naruto nodded as reached into his pouch. "Well, alright, guess it's time to see if it works." Tapping one of the many tiny storage seals that lay inside his weapon's pouch, the blonde pulled out a plain-looking scroll that seemed to have the same exact markings as the one its creator had just used. Of course it looked that way to the untrained eye. A seal's master would be able to easily see just how many alterations had been made to the core of the seals. With the unassuming scroll laid flat on the counter, Jack grabbed what looked to be a standard sword. Then again, this was Remnant, so it was more than likely also a gun or something. Laying it on top of one of the marked areas, Naruto instructed the bearded man to place his hands on the scroll and pour a small amount of his aura into the paper. Everyone watched with bated breath as Jack followed the teen's instructions to the letter. The black ink that made up the actual seal glowed a faint blue for a second before there was a poof of smoke that obscured their vision. Waving their hands, they managed to clear away the small cloud and saw that where there was once a sword, there was only the scroll, now with some writing below the seal, no doubt indicating that there was something in it. "Kid, if you supply me with these, I'd be more than happy to keep you and your friends well stocked on any kind of ammo you may want," said a grinning Jack. You could almost see the gears in his mind turning as it went through the possibilities this presented for him and the business. Normally this would be next to impossible, as drawing even a single storage seal took an hour to do and a whole scroll of them took almost half a day to make. However, Naruto was more than happy to abuse the Kage Bunshin Jutsu for this, as it was a rather lucrative deal. That, and he had used the technique for a lot less before. Seeing as how there was little to no chance he'd ever be able to return home. What with it being a couple centuries in the past, Naruto decided that this would be a good way to start earning some much-needed income. The warrior lifestyle, be it that of a shinobi or huntsman, was not as well paying as most would think, so a lot of them would seek out other areas to supplement that income. Jiraiya had his books, his parents had invested in various businesses both in and out of Konoha, and the various ninja clans in Konoha used their Kekai Genkai or expertise in an area to run their own businesses. Being an accomplished Fuinjutsu practitioner and multitasker with no compare, Naruto saw the opportunity to start making his own business ventures here in his new home of Vale. With a wide grin, Naruto reached into his weapons pouch. "You said you like anything that goes boom, right?" Jack's own grin was almost as mischievous as the blonde's. "Almost. I think you're gonna like this. Got any place where I can show you without having to worry about collateral?" The bearded man motioned for the 4 teens to follow him, leading them behind the counter and into the back room of the shop, which was a huge departure from the tidy look of the actual store itself. Weapons were strewn everywhere, and Team NNPR had the slightest inkling that touching anything could lead to half of Vale being wiped off the map. "Hey guys! Get over here!" Jack's call was answered by several more. "The hell do you want, Jack? Damn it, Jack! You almost blew us all to hell! Oh, anus!" The last shout was shortly followed by a minor explosion that caused several nearby weapons to fall off their shelves. Coming out of the cloud of smoke was possibly one of the motliest-looking groups of guys that the teens had ever seen. With so many varying looks, the group looked like they shouldn't be friends, let alone have met with each other in any point of time. Jack turned to Team NNPR and began introductions. "Kiddies, meet the rest of the achievement hunters. Jeff," a man with tattoos covering both his arms and hands with what looked to be a frazzled version of a handlebar mustache, waved and nodded at them. "How's it going?" Michael, one of the shorter members of the group, stood with a beanie on his head and nodded at them. "Sup, bitches?" Ryan, a tall and rather intimidating-looking man, looked down at them and extended a hand for a handshake, which Naruto took. "Hey guys." For a moment Team NNPR did a double take, astounded at how eerily similar the man sounded to Jack, which had most of the group laughing. Ray, a darker-skinned male with a curly mop of hair and glasses, waved at the teens. "Yo! And I'm Gavin!" came the foreign accent of the last male, who looked rather lanky. Jack didn't seem to be too happy about the interruption though, and yelled, "Damn it, Gavin! We had a thing going and you messed it up! Son of a bitch, Gavin! Can't you be professional for like 2 seconds? Michael snarked. As the group of grown men descended into mindless cursing and name-calling, the 4 teens of Team NNPR could only look on in awkwardness. The insults being hurled around would have caused most people to burst into tears or actually end the friendship, yet from the little smiles and smirks on their faces it looked like this was normal for the store owners. It almost seemed like this was how they bonded, through scathing insults and harsh language. Coughing into his fist, Naruto managed to regain the attention of the men, none of whom seemed at all embarrassed by their previous actions. "So why'd you bring the kiddies back here for?" Michael asked as he eyed the 4 teens. With a grin hidden behind all of his facial hair, Jack just motioned for Naruto to show them. With a shrug, the blonde nin grabbed a nearby spear and performed one of the most basic of the shinobi arts, shocking those who hadn't seen it before. The first to respond was the heavily tattooed Jeff. "Holy shit, kid! Can you recall it as well?" Without even a word, Naruto pumped a minuscule amount of chakra into the seal, and after the ensuing puff of smoke was gone, revealed the formerly sealed spear to be in his hands. Still widely grinning, Jack continued. "Blondie agreed that as long as we keep him and the rest of his team here well stocked on ammo, he'd be willing to supply us with some of these nifty scrolls for our own use." So we can finally clean up this place then?" the dark-skinned Ray noted as he caught on to Jack's idea. "I wouldn't mind. It's a bloody mess back here." Gavin chuckled. Ryan interjected. "Gavin, most of this mess is your fault, so you shouldn't be talking." "Yeah, Gavin, you're the one always blowing shit up," Michael joined in with a smirk. Knowing that with another word the grown men could descend back into yet another squabble, Naruto chose to interrupt them yet again. "There's also something else I think you guys would be interested in. I just need some place that where you don't care about collateral." Hearing his last sentence, Gavin turned to Ray and grinned. "Bunker?" Chuckling, Ray nodded. "Bunker. X-ray and valve away." The two shouted as they hurried behind one of the massive piles of weaponry. Following at a much slower pace, the rest of the crew took the time to explain to the no doubt highly confused teens, Jeff showing himself to be somewhat more of a leader than the others. Gavin and Ray like to test out a lot of the more dangerous stuff as a team, so they made themselves what they call the bunker. It's their personal little testing area, and if it can handle all of their fuck-ups, it should have no problem handling what you have to show us. What about the whole X-ray and VAV thing? Naruto asked out of curiosity. I don't care what you say. The minute they try and pull something like that horrendous sunset of youth, I will erase them from existence, Kurama growled out. Memories of a certain pair of green beasts resurfacing. The fox's Jinchuriki was hard-pressed to argue. No one should ever have to endure the horrifyingly scarring experience that was feared by even the most hardened of criminals. The mustache somewhat leader shrugged. I dunno. You'd have to ask them about that one. Turning around the same corner the two eager co-owners had, Team NNPR could only stare in appreciation at the veritable armory before them. Sure, the store itself and the back room could more than easily supply a whole militia, but somehow Gavin and Ray had managed to construct their own workshop within the already existing one that held almost as much weaponry. How the two had managed to fit so much in what looked to be a simple fallout bunker was mind-boggling. The two then lead the group to a much smaller room that would only fit no more than 5 people at a time, a thick steel door with a glass viewing window cutting it off from the rest of the bunker. Figuring that this was the blast room, where the more explosive items were tested, Naruto walked in and pulled out a small slip of paper from his weapons pouch. Laying it in the middle of the floor, the blonde rejoined the others as Gavin and Ray sealed the door. The fuck is that little slip of paper gonna do? Michael asked as he stared into the room incredulously. Of course, while no one else had said it, it was quite clear from the looks on their faces that everyone, even Naruto's own teammates, agreed with the vulgar statement, and were skeptical of how much damage a simple piece of paper could do. Of course, they didn't know that Fuinjutsu was an art limited only by one's own imagination. Masters of the art could do anything from sealing the soul and power of the strongest portion of a primordial god into a baby, or even bend the very fabric of space and time to their will. Using a slip of paper to do something as simple as causing an explosion was child's play for even a novice. Forming the necessary hand seal, Naruto smirked as he muttered, "Baku explode!" The ensuing explosion rocked the entire store and engulfed the blast room in a storm of flames and concussive air as it pushed against its confinement, seeking to escape and unleash further destruction. It seemed that Gavin and Ray had really built the place as a bunker though, and so the walls and doors stood strong, keeping the conflagration within its 4 walls. With a massive grin stretching across his face, Jeff turned to look at a mischievously smirking Naruto. "Blondie, this is gonna be the start of a beautiful partnership." Following Team NNPR's run into the group known as the Achievement Hunters and Naruto's subsequent business dealings with them that would ensure he and his teammates would never have to worry about ammunition or weapon repairs while also leaving the blonde Uzumaki with a small stake in the store, the 4 teens had decided to do something that didn't have something to do with their profession. Nora had spotted a warehouse that hosted games of laser tag as well as various other activities and enthusiastically voted that be their next stop, which meant she ran into the building before anyone could stop her. What began as a casual game between friends quickly escalated into a heated free-for-all, with the teens eventually using their semblances and battle prowess in an attempt to claim victory. Needless to say, the children who had reserved the room after the 4 were awed as they saw Rin performing acrobatic feats to reach the higher floor where Nora was camping, aiming several decisive hits with his gun that left a pouting hammer wielder out of the game. Their jaws lowered even further as Naruto dropped from the ceiling behind Rin and fired off several shots his teammates exposed back, disqualifying the reserved male. The duel between Pira and Naruto went even further, the redhead using her control over polarity in an attempt to move her friend into the line of fire, while the blonde in turn used his own control over wind to do the same. The adolescent onlookers cheered loudly as the 2 partners matched each other move for move, Naruto using his training as a shinobi of Konoha to perform wild feats of stealth and acrobatics, bouncing from floor to floor and using guerrilla warfare tactics to score hits, while Pirai used her superior skill as a marksman to keep pace and score her own hits. Eventually it came down to both having only 1 HP left on their electronic vests, the blonde captain hidden behind a wall on the highest floor while Pirai panted behind her own cover on the lowest floor. The normally hyperactive children watched with bated breath, waiting to see which of their newest idols would be crowned as champion of laser tag. With an unseen and unheard signal, Naruto dashed from his cover, weaving between pillars, walls, and the other constructs that dotted the arena, Pirai's laser being only centimeters off their target as he did so. When the blonde disappeared into the darkness that coated the arena in most areas, the Greek-themed warrior hid herself in a small alcove, her weapon trained on the only entrance. To her shock and awe, a swirl of leaves appeared right beside her, and out of the small flurry of greenery came her friend, plastic laser gun already firing off a shot that robbed her of her last glowing bar of health. With a grin on his face, Naruto offered a hand to the crouched Pirai, who took it with a smile and laugh. The two shared a good-natured congratulations before their attention was drawn to the loud cheers and hollers coming from the viewing area. So into their own world the partners had failed to realize that they had attracted themselves an audience. Still they took into stride and waved at the crowd of adolescents. As the team of 4 walked out of the arena with waters in hand, Nora was the one to voice the question on the others' minds. "What was that cool swirly thingy you did, Naruto? It was like whoosh, and you disappeared. Were you lying? Are you really a magician?" Okay, so not exactly the way most would have put it, but the point still stood. The blonde captain was growing even more accustomed to his quirky teammate, and was unfazed by the phrasing. "It's actually a pretty standard teleportation jutsu that almost all of my village learned. I know other villages also had their own variations that used their namesakes instead of Konoha's leaves." Ren seemed off-put by the idea that such an impressive technique was regarded as simple. How come such a technique did not become more well-known and feared? It was a valid question for the most part. A teleportation skill that anyone could learn? The uses were endless and would no doubt give rise to a whole new style of battle. The blonde instead shrugged. It was used more often to just move around quicker within the village, and because of all of the limitations, it just wasn't really a viable technique that could be used in battle. Though I do remember hearing that one of Sasuke's family members had figured out how to do it. Stupid Uchihos and their Sharingan, Naruto pouted to himself. Really, the shinobi from the past had all reason to be jealous. There had only ever been 2 weaponized teleportation jutsu that he knew of, and besides the Uchiha whose name he forgot, his father was the only user of one. Deciding to leave his childish dissatisfaction concerning his former teammates Kekai Genkai, Naruto realized that he and his team had been in the laser tag arena for quite some time, the lamp posts now illuminating the streets of Vale. The events of the day seemed to hit the 4 teens all at once, Team NNPR all yawning in sync as their eyes drooped and their posture slackened. Nora was hunched over and Naruto was only somewhat worried that she would collapse and start snoozing right there on the sidewalk. Another yawn hit the half-blood Uzumaki. "Well, time, guess we should call it a night. Bed, Nora is coming," the eccentric young woman called out whilst pointing skyward, before she collapsed onto Ren's back and began snoring away. To his credit, the reserved male seemed unfazed by this and merely tightened his hold on his friend before following Naruto and Pirai. When Nora began to drool with said liquid coating his shoulder, he made no move to stop her, simply taking it in stride. "Guess I'm washing this sweater after all. Just another day in the life of Lyran, really." As Team NNPR sleepily made their way to their room, a voice from behind stopped them in their tracks. "Mr. Uzumaki, glad to see you and your team returning back safely." Almost instantly the team, at least the 3 that were still awake, straightened up and stood at attention, seeing as how it was their headmaster who was addressing them. "Yes, sir, we were just heading to bed now," Naruto spoke, trying his hardest to not let a yawn escape. Nora, even asleep, had perfect timing and decided to let out an especially loud snore, unknowingly driving her captain's point home. While her teammates' sweat dropped at this, Ashbin let a small smile slip across his face. It made him genuinely happy to see his students act their age. There had always been a push from some council members to implement a much harsher regimen to better prepare the kids for their career. And he had always been heatedly against such a decision, and seeing as how he had several decades as an experienced huntsman under his belt as well as the political backing to go with his position as headmaster of Beacon, those voicing such an opinion often found themselves on the losing side of the debate. And it was scenes like this that made it all worth it to the silver-haired headmaster. He would gladly put up with the obnoxiousness that most of the other councilmen boasted if it meant he could let his students have moments like this. Still, there was a time and place for it, and right now he had more pressing matters to deal with. While I'm glad to see you all had fun while out in Vale, I must ask that your captain follow me to my office. There are some things I wish to discuss with him. Seeing the longing look said team leader cast towards the door that stood between him and sleep, Ashbin smirked. Fret not, Mr. Uzumaki, our chat will not take long. You will have more than enough time to get a good night's sleep. With a resigned sigh, Naruto waved to his team and began to follow the headmaster's sedate pace. Normally he would be going over everything he had done in the past few days, trying to figure out just why he was being asked to talk to Ashbin personally, but his sleep-addled mind was far from being capable of that kind of work. Just cause he had an inhuman amount of stamina didn't mean he couldn't feel sleepy, especially after a long day. His sparse-training session with Pyrrha had gotten him going, and then his run-in with Cinder left him with so many questions, and then there were the dealings he had to hash out with the achievement hunters, followed by that intense game of laser tag. Yeah, Naruto was ready for bed. That in mind, the blonde shinobi was relieved when the imposing structure of Ashbin's office came into view. Taking a seat opposite to the older male, Naruto waited to see just what this was all about. Seeing as how late it is and how long of a day you must have had, I'll get to the point. After reviewing both your own performance and the performance of your teammates, as both individuals and as a cohesive unit, myself and several other professors have seen fit to do something we normally don't do. As of this moment, Team NNPR is being pulled into the active duty roster. Naruto sat and stared blankly at his technical commander, not saying a word. Any form of fatigue or sleepiness that had clouded his mind had been blown away by the brevity of the situation. He knew that as he had become more at ease with his situation, he had been showing more and more of his true potential. Thanks to this, his team had tried to keep stride, and he knew that outside of their team training days, the others were working their respective asses off to not drag him down, as it were, and in doing so they had earned themselves the top spot in the first-year class ranking, Team RWBY trailing behind them. But to hear that they had apparently been performing so well that they were being pulled into the active duty roster, something that didn't happen until a month or so into their second year, was mind-boggling. Not that I'm not extremely happy to hear that my team has apparently done so well as to warrant your attention, but why? I find it hard to believe that a still freshly inducted team of first years is being pulled onto the field so soon. Naruto spoke in a no-nonsense tone. As a shinobi, he knew that information could mean life or death for people in their profession, despite the change in who or what they were battling. He was not about to put his team, his friends, lives on the line without knowing the whys and hows. You are right to be wary of this. Unfortunately, I must admit that the call was not one made solely by myself or my colleagues here at Beacon. The order came from even above me, Ashbin grudgingly admitted. He seemed especially displeased to have to do this. Of course, Naruto had dealt with his own council and was used to getting screwed over by them, so he knew that it was Vale's council who had called for this move without the silver-haired huntsman having to even say anything. The only question was why they were pushing for this. Why us specifically? Taking a sip from his mug to calm his mind, Ashbin replied. Vale is in a precarious position right now. Despite how well we seem to be doing, there is always the worry of the things that wish to see us buried and gone, both non-human and human. The human aspect has become especially worrisome with the White Fang's recent actions, and that problem is only being compounded by Roman Torchwick's rash of thefts. Add to that the fact that the man has evaded all our attempts at apprehending him, while most of our council is more than worried. Seeing where this was going already, Naruto picked up from where the headmaster left off. And because of what happened on the docks a few nights ago, the council is having us, more specifically me, put on the spot because we were the only ones to get anywhere close to catching him. Ashbin only nodded, happy to see that the blonde was not just going to leap into the unknown without having some knowledge beforehand. Seeing the calculative look on whiskered cheeks, the elder male had to pat himself on the back for making the young Uzumaki leader of Team NPR. He was clearly weighing all the pros and cons, not willing to lead his team on what could very well be a suicide mission. First mission, actual mission as a genin, and it ends up being an A rank, and I end up almost dying and manage to somehow liberate a small nation from the death grip of a grubby little tyrant. First month of being at Beacon, and I somehow managed to get the attention of some crazy chick who wants to recruit me to her cause, and now Vale's council wants me and my team to perform a mission even veteran huntsmen have failed at. Kurama? What? Do you know if Kami is a guy or girl? I'm gonna regret asking. But why do you want to know? 'Cause I'd like to know what gender the person is when I'm getting fucked by them 6 ways to Sunday. Barely restraining himself from just jumping out the nearest window in pure frustration, Naruto spoke. I take it we don't really have a say in this. Unfortunately, no. I tried to dissuade them from this decision, but in the end I was outvoted. However, I did manage to stop them from sending you out on higher-ranked missions for the next year. Instead, you will be taking, at most, 3 missions a month. This first month will also have you paired with an older team as backup, just in case. Despite the situation, the whiskered teen was happy to know that his headmaster genuinely cared for his students. It reminded him quite a bit of the elderly Sandame who had been the one to look out for him in his younger years and the one who had given him his dream to become Hokage. Heaving a sigh of resignation, Naruto nodded. I'll tell my team the news tomorrow. Any idea when our first mission is? End of this week. With a tired bow, Naruto left the office, even more eager to get into his bed now. Once the teen was clear out the door, Glinda decided to enter from the side door where her own office was situated. This still doesn't sit right with me, Ashbin. Regardless of how I may feel in regards to him, Uzumaki is still a child and he shouldn't be put on the spot like this. The headmaster spun his chair and stared out into the window that revealed the vacant campus of Beacon in all its nighttime glory. I know. I don't like this either. However, you know as well as I do that I was lucky enough to have gotten them the respite that I did. The grim look on the blonde deputy headmistress' face revealed that she knew what her longtime friend and colleague had said was true. And what of Team RWBY? Thankfully, I was able to inform both Crow and Taeyang in time, and they were quick to use their own connections to put a stop to having Ruby and Yan put on active duty so soon. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for Weiss. Glinda could only sneer. It figures that man would push for his daughter to be in such a position, regardless of the dangers. Indeed. Luckily, with myself as well as Crow and Taeyang protesting it, there was not much he could do, even with his own political sway. Crossing her arms under her bust, Glinda joined Ashbin in staring out at the nighttime view before them. I am still worried about Team NPR. Both Uzumaki and Nikos are exceptional fighters far above their age, and Lyrin and Valkyrie seem intent on catching up, but the world is an unforgiving place. Yes, the world is harsh, but I have faith. If worse comes to worse, I have no doubt that Mr. Uzumaki will manage to pull something out of his sleeves. He seems to be quite the unpredictable element. Instead of going to his room like he had planned, Naruto found himself perched atop a tree on the outskirts of Beacon's campus, staring blankly at the moon. So much had happened in one day that he found himself needing time to adjust and gain his bearings, a task that would be made harder if he were around others. But here in the forest, a place he felt the most at home in, alongside an equally quiet Kurama, the displaced shinobi found a sense of peace. I wonder how far into the future we are, Naruto mused to himself. Very far, considering how much the land and world has changed. In my thousands of years of living before I was sealed into your ancestor, the continents and land masses had only moved by the smallest of margins. It must be centuries upon centuries for the continents to have shifted into their current position, Kurama replied. His container hummed in thought, or something happened to cause the shift to happen faster than they would normally. That is also a possibility. Then there's the difference in the people. It seems we were right to assume that somehow the people have had their chakra split into two, giving birth to aura and semblances. Not to mention the birth of Faunus. You think the Faunus are just the descendants of clans like the Inuzuka? Naruto questioned. In turn, the Kyuubi shook his head. While it would seem so, seeing as how it would be a natural progression for clans like the Inuzuka to become more animalistic, I don't think that is the case. There is just too large a variety from cats, dogs, deer, and other animals for it to be the evolution of those clans, though canine Faunus might have some link to the clans of old. The only plausible thing I can think of is that somehow the world of summons and this world merged, and the consequence of that was the birth of the Faunus. That would explain why I can no longer summon the toads. Yes, it would seem that with the creators of the contract being technically dead or MT Mayaboku no longer existing in that plane, the contract is unable to pull anyone or anything to this plane, Kurama mused. Rubbing his head in frustration, Naruto continued, What about the Grim? And Dust? Where did they come from? The Biju sat on his haunches and used his tail to scratch underneath his jaw. We already know for a fact that the Grim are much like we Biju were, entirely made up of chakra, in this case nature chakra. However, how they are born is an entirely different matter. We were born when the sage split the RWBY. The Grim may have been born in a similar manner. While it was plausible, the thought astounded the blonde, but you said the RWBY was the origin of chakra. And it took the sage and his brother to split up that monster. Even then you and the others only had a fraction of its power. Yes, so if the Grim were indeed born like us, then it raises the question, what were they born from and who was the one to do it? Naruto nodded in agreement, but the 9 of you were a one-time thing. There are Grims still being born, almost endlessly. Coiling himself around his container's neck, Kurama sighed. Unfortunately, we still cannot answer all these questions. To get these answers, the best thing to do would be to try and find anything left over from our time. If that woman could find some, then we should easily be able to find plenty more laying around, forgotten by others. You know, I never took you for the brooding type, Foxy. Came a call from below. Dropping back down to terra firma, Naruto was met with the grinning face of Team RWBY's busted brawler. Crossing his arms with a huff, the male blonde retorted, I was not brooding, just thinking, intensely. Mimicking his posture, though considering Yang's developed figure it had a whole different effect, she snarked. Yeah, totally wasn't like you had this scowl on your face or anything. Not like you had us all worrying either. How dash? Your room is across the way from ours. We all heard when Ashpin called you. Ruby was worried, and so we went to your guy's room to wait for you. Nora was the one who spotted you, coming this way instead going back to the room. And you volunteered to come get me? Naruto questioned with a raised brow. In turn, Yang wrapped an arm around her fellow blonde's neck. Figured that if you were gonna be difficult, I could always just beat you up and drag your ass back. While the two blondes had their fair bit of rough housing, Naruto had to think to himself, maybe finding out all the answers isn't the most important thing right now. If we do find anything, then great. If not, well, I have new precious people to worry about. While he didn't voice anything aloud, Kurama was glad to see his container gaining back his old resolve. As much as he seemingly cheered for the teen Uzumaki to become more like a real shinobi, deep down he knew that if that were to happen, it would be betray every part of who Naruto Uzumaki was. He wasn't supposed to be a good shinobi. What had made him such a force to be reckoned with was not superior tactics or anything like that. No, it was his ironclad will to protect those he considered precious to him, consequences be damned. It was this drive to do what was right that had endeared the Jinchuriki to him. It was this will to fight for peace that reminded the fox of his own father, the only being whom he respected more than any other. For a time he had truly believed that Naruto would be the one to do what even the sage had failed at doing, bring peace to the shinobi era. All right, Foxy, now carry me back. Wait, why the hell should I? 'Cause you made me come out here in the middle of the night wearing only pajamas, so the least you could do is keep me warm and take me back to my bed. Realizing that Yang was just as stubborn as he was, Naruto decided that the only way he was going to get to bed tonight without a beating was if he listened to her. Lowering himself to his knees, he was only slightly surprised when the outspoken teen jumped onto his back. What really surprised him was when she almost literally began to snuggle into his back. Nonetheless, he began the trek back to their rooms at a moderate pace, enjoying the weight on his back and the warmth it brought to him. Growing up an orphan and the village pariah had left him starved for any kind of attention. It wasn't until recent years that he got the affection he had been denied as a child, and even still what most would take as small things meant the world to him. The late hour seemed to be taking its toll on his passenger, as well as she was slowly becoming slightly heavier, allowing herself to come closer and closer to the realm of Morphus. On the cusp of a deep sleep, Young snuggled further into his shoulders. "How come you're so warm, Foxy?" "'Cause I have a gigantic constructive living chakra in my gut that keeps my body temperature far above the normal human temperature," Naruto quipped to himself. Clearly even closer to that deep sleep, the Bustatine only hummed in response. "Makes sense." And like that, Yang was fast asleep, shaking his head and thankful that she was far too deep into the realm of sleep to have really registered what he said. Naruto just smiled. "Well, no one can say I never told them the truth now." "Did you find what I was looking for, Roman?" said Notorious Criminal, shrugged and carelessly tossed a scroll that looked like it would fade into dust on top of the table between them. "Yeah. Don't know why you're so interested in these old things anyways. Not like they're of any real value." Torchwick snarked as he took out one of his cigars. Only for said cigar to be burned to a crisp. Turning to look at his technical boss, he felt a shiver of fear run down his spine as amber eyes glared heatedly at him, flames seemingly dancing around the luminescent orbs. "They are far more valuable than any of the trinkets you normally steal, and if all goes according to plan, they will yield me results that you never could. Do not overestimate your own worth, Roman, or it may well be your last mistake. Understood?" Roman Torchwick was a well-traveled man. He had fought tooth and nail to get to where he was and had earned himself a feared name in both the criminal underworld and in the political world. As such, he had been faced with death many times and yet had still triumphed over those situations, becoming more and more fearless as the years passed. However sly or powerful he thought himself, though, he knew that the woman before him, Cinderfall, was leagues more powerful than him and could easily incinerate him if she so desired. It had been a long while since he had felt the cold rush of true fear course through his body. "Understood. By your leave?" Cinder casually waved a hand, already engrossed in the scroll he had brought her. "Tailed beasts? Are they like Grimm? This is interesting." Chapter 10. "You guys are already getting pulled for activity duty. Lucky!" a wide-eyed Ruby Rose exclaimed. Seeing as how both his team and Team RWBY had been curious about why Ojpin had called for him so late, Naruto had explained to them that he and his team were being promoted. While Ruby was jealous, he could see the apprehensive looks some of the others wore, no doubt understanding why he wasn't exactly happy about the decision either. Originally, he had pulled aside his team and explained it to them personally, even telling them that they had no way out of the call. Instead of being excited, though, he was met with grim looks of realization from them. They had no illusions about how strong they were and also knew that the world they lived in wasn't all unicorns and rainbows, the night on the docks having shown them just that. That night had actually been a pivotal point for both Ren and Nora, who, while not overly cocky where their own strength was concerned, had been confident enough to think they were catching up to their captain and teammate, who were both being touted as prodigies. However, that mysterious woman had burned those thoughts right up, having fought them off with the ease one would have when swatting a fly. Had Naruto not intervened, they may well have suffered horrendous burns or even death. Now they were being recruited to help in the case she and her lackeys appeared again? It was almost suicidal. Both Blake and Yang were acquainted with the criminal underworld for their own reasons and had seen more than anyone their age had any right to, giving them first-hand knowledge of just how harsh the world could be. They had since distanced themselves from that life for obvious reasons. The huntsman life expectancy was already short as it was, no need to shorten it any further. Chuckling, Naruto nodded. "Yeah, I guess, but for our first few missions we're gonna have an older team to mentor us or something. Not that we need it, Tebeo." big talk from someone who hasn't even taken their first mission. Came a familiar voice. Walking up to the two first-year teams was the older team of CFVY, Coco strutting up to her favorite blonde, with a smirk. Not being one to so easily back down, Naruto stared straight into the tinted sunglasses of the elder teen and smirked. Who said it was my first mission? Coco just copied the gesture and crossed her arms, leaning on one leg to accentuate her hips. Oh really? Far as I know, they didn't give out missions to the kiddies at Sanctum or Signal. The whiskered shinobi shrugged. Maybe not at Sanctum or Signal, but as soon as you graduated our academy in Konoha, you were put on a 4-man cell with an elder huntsman, and if you passed their test you were put on active duty and could start taking missions. Eyebrows rose in surprise at hearing that not only had Naruto been on a previous team of 4, but that a village would allow its warriors to start taking missions straight out of the academy. Though Blake also had a stray thought cross her mind, he did it again. Why does he say certain words like that? As the raven-haired fauness pondered her friend's odd speech patterns, Ruby raised a different question. Wait, if that's the case, then how old were you when you started your academy? I was entered in 2 years earlier due to certain circumstances, but the starting age for Konoha's academy was 5. 5. Was the resounding shout from the others, most shocked and outraged that a village would start training children at such a young age to be trained killers. Sure, most huntsman families started training their kids pretty early, but not till much later, around the age of 9 or 10, considering that schools like Sanctum and Signal accepted students aged 12. On one hand, Naruto understood why they were shocked. From an outside looking in perspective, training kids at such a young age to do the things that were expected of a ninja could be borderline child abuse. Konoha wasn't so harsh in its curriculum, compared to villages like Kumo and Kiri, but it was still unbelievable. On the other hand, that was the shinobi era. In all honesty, it had been a lot safer and a lot less mentally scarring during his generation when you looked at how things operated during the First or Second Great Shinobi War, even more so when one looked at the time before the birth of the hidden villages. When did you graduate? A shocked Velvet asked. Again, Naruto casually answered. 12 at least. At least? Some people graduated earlier. My sensei graduated when he was 5 and my teammate's brother graduated when he was 7. The blonde waved off. While the feat may seem amazing, having known Kakashi on a personal level had kind of ruined the image that most people made up based on his career. Sure, he was a very skilled ninja and had been hailed as a prodigy, but Naruto knew him as the lazy pervert who had mentored him and the others of Team 7. Shaking her head, Coco threw her hands up in a "What can you do?" gesture. Well, your crazy village aside, thought I'd let you know that we're gonna be the team who keeps an eye on you guys so you don't screw anything up. As Naruto and his fellow team captain discussed the mission specifics, his own team as well as Team RWBY began to look at their blonde friend in a different light. They had all seen the goofy side of the teen who was always grinning or trying to make some joke, and they had even seen him angry. But never before had they thought that he was really a no doubt highly trained warrior. At age 12. For Team NNPR, it answered a lot of their questions. Key among them being how and why he was so far above their own level. Simply put, he had had near a decade more training under his belt and 5 years of actual combat experience to go with it. It also explained why he seemed so at ease when working with them. He already had practice working with a 4-man cell. Blake, knowing about the harshness of his childhood, grew even more respect for her fellow faunus. Not only had he survived the years of bigotry thrown at him from his own people, but he had also experienced the life of a warrior and managed to hold strong to his beliefs. It said a lot about his mental fortitude to be able to survive under all that pressure. See you in a few days then, Whiskers. Coco patted Naruto's cheek and sauntered off, Velvet smiling demurely as she and the rest of Team CVFY followed after their captain. Yang glared at the retreating forms of the elder teens and huffed. I still can't stand her. Already knowing that the two outgoing teens clashed too much to really get along, the others only sighed and nodded their heads, Ruby patting her sister on her shoulder. We know, Yang, we know. Anyways, you got a sec, princess? Naruto asked, surprising almost everyone. At this point they all knew that it had been the leader of Team NPR who had stepped in and given the Schnee heiress a talking to that had put her on the path to mending her relationship with her younger captain. What had been said though had been kept between the two, Weiss feeling that what she had been told was rather personal and didn't need repeating to others, while Naruto simply didn't feel like taking the time to actually explain the long and emotional talk that would no doubt come up as a result of his talking about his former teammate. Still, no one ever expected the odd sort of friendship the two shared due to that talk to really turn into anything, seeing as how Naruto seemed to take pleasure in bothering the girl and doing anything he could to make her annoyed with him. Raising a snow-white eyebrow, Weiss replied, "Why? You better not be trying to prank me again or I swear I'll dash." Naruto chuckled nervously as he frantically waved his hands. No pranks, just want to ask you a couple things is all." As the two ventured off, Weiss warily keeping an eye on Naruto, they didn't see the shocked and confused looks of their respective teammates and friends. Guys, did Naruto and Weiss just have a decent conversation without trying to murder each other? Yang asked aloud. No one said anything, still staring at the backs of their retreating friends, but they all nodded in unison, too shocked to do so. Well, damn. So what in the world did you need to talk to me about? Weiss huffed. Naruto took a seat on the stone bench that was located near the entrance to Beacon's library. Seeing as how your family is one of the largest producers of dust, I figured you'd know a lot about the stuff. Weiss mirrored the blonde's actions and seated herself, raising an eyebrow as she did so. Wait, so all you want is to know about dust? You could just look that up in a book or something. The Jinchuriki waved his hands. I know, and I did that, but all the book told me was how it's used and how to combine them to make other elements and stuff. What I want to know is what dust is, like where it comes from and all that. For her part, Weiss was rather surprised to hear that someone wanted to actually learn about dust itself. Most were satisfied with knowing how to use it without blowing themselves up, and even she would admit that if it wasn't for her family being known for the stuff, she probably wouldn't have invested too much thought into it. Well, we actually don't know all that much about it. I know my family pays a lot of researchers to look into all of that, but they haven't made much headway. Seeing the crestfallen look that made Naruto look like a kicked puppy, Weiss continued. But I do know that the only places it can be found are in caves hidden in the most far-removed places. It's also near impossible to manufacture any kind of dust. I've heard that some of the researchers think it comes from energy stored deep in the caves, left over from something. Kurama, you don't think dash? It's a strong possibility. The only way we would be able to confirm it though is if we ventured into one of these caves. Not letting the shock of his revelation show on his face, Naruto grinned. Thanks, princess. There is one other thing I was wondering about though. How does your semblance work? Needless to say, the royally dressed heiress was caught a little off guard hearing that someone was interested in her semblance. Again, it was one of those things that very few people put more stock into outside of knowing how to use it properly. Well, it depends on what I want it to do. The main part of it is the actual making of the glyphs. From there I can use them for a lot of different things: speed increase, as an adhesive, or even like an adrenaline boost dash. But can you say, affect time within the area of the glyphs? And does each type of glyph have its own unique design that creates that effect? And if so, do you consciously know how to create those individual segments, or is it kind of just a dash? Hey, hold on. Why do you want to know so much about my semblance? Weiss asked, seeing the frantic look in Naruto's eyes as he pestered her was unusual. It was clear that he was passionate, and all, but it was also somewhat off-putting to see the goofy blonde act like some scientist who was talking to someone who could them all the answers they needed. Realizing that he had more than likely made the RWBY team member uncomfortable with his barrage of questions, Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. Well, when I first saw your glyphs during the initiation, it looked similar to something my family was known for. Now that piqued Weiss' interest. As far as she knew, her semblance was among the more unique ones, not really having found anything similar to her powers even in her own family. Apparently Naruto's family said otherwise though. Taking note of the apprehension in the Schnee-heiress' eyes, Naruto grinned as he pulled out a higher grade seal than just your standard storage seal. Weiss looked at the unassuming piece of paper, but what caught her eyes was what was on the paper and its overall motif. While there were obvious differences in the style and makeup, the entire design as a whole was eerily similar to that of her own glyphs. What is that? Back home it was just one of the many basic arts that existed and was used pretty frequently. My family though was known for our unparalleled mastery of the art. It's called Fuinjutsu or sealing techniques, Naruto stated proudly. Weiss looked at the seal with a critical eye. And what does this one do? It's called a gravity seal. The name pretty much gives it away. Naruto smiled cheekily. While it's interesting to see something similar to my glyphs, what's the point? Weiss asked impatiently. She really had no issues with the blonde, especially now that he was being somewhat serious and not trying to prank her, but she still had other things to do. The one flaw with Fuinjutsu is that it takes almost perfect and precise penmanship, something I can't really do in the middle of battle. I have to already have the seals ready beforehand if I want to use them in battle. Your semblance though allows me to do just that, the Schneeris said, catching on to where the blonde teen was getting at. However, there was just one problem. You do know semblances are unique, right? I mean, I could probably create your seals and use them, but you wouldn't be able to. Weiss interrupted, stating what she thought was rather obvious. No matter how hard someone tried, it was just impossible to imitate another's semblance. Even still, the young misplaced ninja seemed upturned by this, like it wasn't even a problem for him. Just leave that part to me. What I want to know is how you create your glyphs. Do you just visualize it, and it happens, or do you mentally construct it from the ground up? Seeing no harm in explaining the intricacies of her power, Weiss shrugged. It depends. If it's a glyph I've used before, I can usually just visualize what I want to happen and it's made. But if I wanted to do something I've never done before, I'd have to almost make it from scratch. Using Murdermaster as a sort of focus helps with those and even speeds up the overall process. Merton, what now? Weiss sighed in frustration. Murdermaster, my rapier. The proverbial light bulb went off in Naruto's head. You use the dust in your sword to amplify the effects of your glyphs. You've been a great help, Weiss. If the Schneeris was surprised at the captain of Team NNPR using her actual name, it was overshadowed by the warm and tight hug said teen gave her before running off to do whatever it was he suddenly found so urgent. It was this somewhat shell-shocked Weiss that the other members of RWBY and Naruto's team found, curious to know what caused the normally cold and haughty young women to look so out of character. Weiss? You in there? Ruby asked as she waved her hands in front of the almost catatonic Weiss. Yang, being the mischievous girl she was, grinned and jumped on the opportunity presented to her. Fox got your tongue, Weiss? Maybe Naruto gave her a kiss too soon. 'Cause it sounds like Kitsune? Seeing the blank stares aimed at her, the busted teen huffed. You guys wouldn't know comedy gold if it hit you in the face. While the blonde was content to make jokes, or attempt to, certain teens found the thought of Naruto actually kissing Weiss to be unsettling for reasons they could not discern. Why does the thought of Naruto with Weiss make me feel so uneasy? Shouldn't I be happy that he could have found someone to be happy with? What's wrong with me? A certain redhead pondered. Similar thoughts were running through a certain young faunus mind. Why do I care if Naruto and Weiss end up together? It'd be odd with them being such polar opposites. But it's not just that. I don't want him to be with her like that. Why? The next few days were a blur for Team NNPR. They still attended their classes as per their usual, but Naruto had decided to intensify not only their joint training sessions, but their individual ones as well, taking the time to spar with each of his teammates one-on-one. While they were nowhere near the level of their captain or some more experienced huntsman, the improvements to their skill was still noticeable. Ashbin was especially glad to see that the team would not crack under the new pressure put on them. There had been high expectations for them before for having Pira and the surprise prodigy, Naruto on the same team, but now they were put under even further scrutiny and being held to a higher standard for being the first freshman team to be pulled onto the active duty roster. Not that that really meant anything to anyone on the team. Both Naruto and Pira were already used to being in the public eye, for differing reasons, and so it was nothing new for them. Nora lived in her own little world and she seemed content to either be completely oblivious to or ignore the pressure. Ren was, well, Ren. Team CFVY was seen hanging out with the younger teens, even more so now, Coco stating that she wanted to see what all the hubbub was about. Sure, she had seen Naruto humiliate Carden, but the leader of Team CRDL was nothing special, and so the fight hadn't really given her an accurate picture of just how strong the blonde of Team NNPR was. After seeing Naruto and NNPR's red-haired second-in-command spar, the elder teen could definitely see why the spotlight was being aimed at the four younger teens. Knowing that, Coco grinned as she and the rest of her team watched as a battle-ready Team NNPR marched towards them and the cargo plane that would take them to the location of their mission. "Looks like the newbies are ready for action," the mocha-haired teen taunted. Naruto rose to the challenge. "Ready to show you guys up is more like it." Velvet tried to defuse the situation. "Come on, you two, we have a mission to take care of." The two captains grinned at each other before nodding, making their way into the large aerial machine with their respective teammates, following behind them. Taking a seat, they gave a thumbs up to the pilot, who silently nodded back to them before firing up the aircraft, quickly bringing them into the clouds. With the side doors opened, the freezing winds of the higher altitude rushed in, blowing everyone's hair around and bringing with it a frigid chill, and yet no one seemed bothered by this. Naruto's cerulean orbs were focused intensely on the outside view, watching as the buildings of Vale gave way to sprawling greenery, herds of Grimm moving about and tending to their own business. While he seemed to be simply sightseeing, he was mentally preparing himself for the mission ahead. It was a simple one. A village that lay just beyond Vale's borders had been hit several times by a group of Grimm consisting of a few Beowulfs. While normally the retired huntsman and even the 3 active huntsmen that occupied the town could handle such a threat, they had been overtaken and injured by 2 much older Grimm who seemed to act as the pack leaders. The 2 leaders had shown skill and cunning born from years of combat with huntsmen, and had critically wounded the village's protectors. The only reason the village was still standing was thanks to the villagers having taken up arms and defending themselves as best they could, managing to force the pack to retreat. However, it seemed that the village was on its last legs, fearing that one more attack could be the final crippling blow that would leave the villagers and the village itself decimated. Something raised warning bells in Naruto's head, though. It was the simple nature of Grimm. It was true that, for all intents and purposes, the beasts despised humans and would gladly fill their belly with human flesh, but that didn't change the fact that they normally wouldn't outright target such a small settlement with such vehemence. The only plausible answer was what seemed to link the Grimm even further to the Biju, the ability to sense concentrations of negative emotions. As they grew closer to the village, Kurama narrowed his eyes and confirmed their suspicions. "Kit, I'm sensing a lot more negativity than should be in such a small area. These Grimm are definitely here for a reason." In turn, Naruto sighed and shook his head, "And my luck with missions continues." Rousing himself from his mental reverie, the blonde shinobi mentally went over the weapons and scrolls he had on him as he reached for the scroll that contained Hai no Ishi. Seeing their captain pull out his staff, the rest of Team NNPR followed suit and got their weapons ready, already knowing to trust their captain's instincts. Coco raised an eyebrow, taking their uneasiness as a sign of the jitters that came with going on their first mission. Even still, she gave the rest of her team a look, letting them know to be on their feet and ready for anything. The pilot turned and gave the 2 teams the signal that they were at the drop point. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to take them down with all the forestry in the way, and being so far from the city walls, it was highly likely that the Grimm would take the opportunity to attack anything that got close to the ground. Naruto and Coco nodded to each other before leaping out to either side, their teams following them seconds after. Releasing a breath, Naruto began pushing chakra into the air around him, pulling it in and forming a bubble around him that slowed his fall. Thanks to his slowed descent and the bubble of chakra around him, the blonde landed with only a slight thud. Pira took a similar approach, however she used her control over polarity to push herself upwards, fighting against gravity with only enough force to stop her from crashing into the ground and possibly breaking her legs. She did funnel a bit of her aura into her lower half as she landed, though, just in case. "Nora, Well, no one was really sure how she managed to land without injuring herself. She just did. Ren took a bit more of a dangerous approach, swinging on the branches of the trees to subtract from his speed. However, thanks to his more lithe and agile form as well as his skill in acrobatics, the raven-haired teen managed to land without any serious injuries outside of a few scrapes and scratches on his hands. How Team CFVY managed to land without making a single sound or suffering an injury was a mystery, especially seeing as how both of its female members were wearing heels. Personally, Naruto was happy to just chalk it up as one of the many mysteries that surrounded the alien species known as the human female. Well, we're here as backup, so go ahead and take the lead and we'll follow, Koko stated matter-of-factly. Shrugging, Naruto went into mission mode. The village is a little less than a mile from here, so we should be able to get there pretty quick, but be alert. We don't know where that Beowulf pack is, and there are bound to be plenty of other Grimm out there. Pyrrha, your turn. Naruto knew he wasn't the best tactician outside of battle. Sure, he could come up with some pretty wild and ingenious plans in the heat of the moment, but outside of that? Planning wasn't really his forte. However, he made up for that by being more than ready to admit his weaknesses, and with teammates who could help him cover them, he was more than happy to hand over the reins. Pyrrha was no Shikamaru, lazy bum that he was, but she was still a whole lot better of a planner than he was. Naruto, take point. If we get into any trouble, you can weaken them up for the rest of us if need be. I'll go after him in case he needs cover. Turning to analyze their seniors, the redhead took what she knew of them before coming up with a plan. You four can be in the middle, formation doesn't matter, just be ready to respond. Nori, you cover our back, and Rin, you cover her. We run into any strong opposition, be ready to form teams Disaster and Rose. Otherwise, stick to formation. Her teammates nodded at her, showing their complete faith in her planning, while Team CFVY was surprised at how efficient the invincible girl was in coming up with a game plan not only for her team, but for them as well. While it wasn't the best formation, having them in the middle, she didn't know their strengths or weakness, just that they were more experienced than her and her team and had put them in a position that, if worst came to worst, they would be able to help in whatever way they could. Solid plan. Flawless? No, but still a damn good one that used what she had on hand. Points to Nikos for being able to form a plan that fast, and a decent one at that. More points to Whiskers for being so ready to hand off control to someone who he knew was better suited to the situation. So far so good, Koko mentally checked off. The two teams followed Pyrrha's orders and soon were making their way to their destination at a moderately quick pace, wanting to get there quickly, but still conserve energy just in case. Minutes away from the village, Naruto put everyone into action mode when he swung his Shikujo and unleashed a condensed ball of air into the distance. Not even seconds later, a pained cry and a small explosion echoed throughout the trees. Taking a detour, the others saw what remained of the quickly fading body of a Beowulf. It was scouting. Those two Elder Grimm aren't just experienced, they're skilled. They know what they're doing, Naruto stated with a grim look settling on his whiskered cheeks. Meanwhile, the others took in this new information. It wasn't unheard of for Grimm to grow more intelligent as they aged and fought, but to be able to plan out with this much foresight was frightening. Only now was it becoming clear how a single pack with two leaders was able to critically injure the handful of retired huntsmen and 3 active ones. Once more, Pyrrha took the reins. New plan, we're a few minutes from the village, let's get there as quickly as possible. Nodding in agreement, the blonde captain of NPR was the first to act, leaping into the trees and traveling at breakneck speeds. For a second the others stood shocked, never having seen someone able to so casually use the branches of trees to travel at such speeds. However, the seriousness of the situation took precedence over any questions that could be answered later, and soon the others sped off as well, attempting to catch up to the speedy blonde. Sitting atop the roof of a small hut, Naruto could not shake the feeling that something was horribly amiss. Their arrival and greeting from the village had gone as one would expect it to, the 8 teens being met with cheers and eyes brimming with hope watching them near constantly. After the minor celebration that took place upon their arrival, they had gone to see the eldest huntsman who had been the one responsible for leading the small town thus far. The gray-haired veteran was a kindly man who had explained to them the current situation in further detail, and had even described his own bout with the two leaders of the Grim Pack. Even still, as the injured and elderly man talked, Naruto just could not shake the feeling that something was not right. Kurama confirmed this, saying that the old huntsman definitely harbored a surprising amount of negativity around him, far more than was okay to have. You realize that you have set the others on edge, correct? Naruto sighed and nodded, already having felt the approaching form of his only male teammate and friend. I know, but something is terribly wrong here, but I don't know what, and it's driving me insane. Rin seemed unperturbed by the outburst. So you feel it too? That surprised Naruto a little. Wait, you feel it too? Rin nodded, still gazing out at the village. My semblance has gifted me with a sort of sixth sense. It's not the most accurate or detailed, but it warns me when something is off, especially with others. The blonde male frowned in thought. Sounds almost like your negative emotion sensing. Like hell it does. No pathetic Ningen can compare to my powers. Kurama was understandably upset over the comment. Ignoring the grumblings of the prideful Biju, Naruto asked the obvious. How does it work? Because of my control over my aura, I can also get a feel for the aura of those around me, and how a person's aura fluctuates says a lot about them. For example, yours is almost constantly moving and reacts according to your emotions with frightening accuracy. You also have a lot of it. Okay, so less like your power and more like a sensor nins, the young Jinchuriki concluded. Ren narrowed his eyes. And while we were talking with that retired huntsman, something about his aura unsettled me. I've had this feeling ever since we've been here. Naruto threw himself backwards and stared up at the night sky in frustration. Arg! We're getting nowhere. Chuckling at his captain, the long-haired male nodded. True, but all we can do is sit and wait for the truth to come to us. The blonde teen gave a bland look to his teammate. Never been good at the whole sitting and waiting thing. Too boring. A vicious and hauntingly melodious howl rang throughout the village and the surrounding area, both teens staring into the distance with weapons already in hand. The rest of their team, along with the members' team CFVY, came rushing out of the hut below them, looking just as ready for the inevitable battle. Team Pancake, take the civilians somewhere safe. Velvet and Fox with them. Koko, Yatsuhashi, Pira with me. We're going hunting. If anyone bumps into either of the two leaders, send up a shot. Do not engage alone. Got it? Go! Naruto could already feel adrenaline and chakra rushing through his body in almost equal parts, his inner warrior and animal instincts demanding for battle and the rush that came with it. Kurama was not helping the matter, finally. Please tell me I can get in on this. That gave the blonde a pause. It had been a while since his partner had actually done any fighting, the fight with Torchwick's bodyguard notwithstanding, seeing as how he only unleashed a single small-scale Baijidama. A quick use of chakra told him that the pack of Grimm were well into the double digits, nearing the triple digits, meaning they would need all the help they could get. Pancake, I'm sending Kurama as backup. The call came as a surprise to everyone as they eyed the grinning fox kit that normally lazed about. Sure, Naruto had made it clear that his partner could dish out some serious damage, but that still remained to be seen, as no one had really seen the quadruped do much more than act as a fashionable scarf. That surprise was soon doubled when, with a leap and a flurry of burning orange energy, the tiny fox kit was replaced by a waist-high nine-tailed fox. A menacing grin stretched across its maw, showing off the razor-sharp fangs that filled said mouth. While many thought of the tiny fox as cute, despite its odd coloration and black markings, this form was truly terrifying, its crimson orbs now capable of striking the fear of death into any who gazed into them. Another noticeable change was the tail, now tails. Where once there had been a single tail was now 9 long ones, swaying every which way in a mesmerizing dance of sorts. The teen's fascination with the shape-shifting fox was turned into morbid horror, as a foolish Beowulf attempted to capitalize on their lack of awareness, claws ready to tear into a vulnerable velvet. This was put to an abrupt halt as the now terrifying form of Kurama leapt onto the Grim, landing with enough force as to crater the ground where they landed. The two front paws of the Biju, which they saw now seemed oddly human with the addition of opposable thumbs, pinned the limbs of the creature of Grimm while Kurama put his teeth to work, viciously tearing into the jugular of the Beowulf with glee shining in his twin pools of bloody crimson. With a victorious roar of his own, the Kyubi no Kitsune announced his presence on the battlefield. "Oh, how I've missed this! We have got to do this more often, Kit. I'll explain later. For now, we got a mission to do." Snapping back to reality, the others nodded, though they were not afraid to admit that the grinning visage of the once cute fox Kit was more than likely going to appear in their nightmares for the next few nights. Among the four of them, it had been decided that Ren and Fox, being the more agile and quick-footed ones, would be the ones to gather up the villagers while Nora, Velvet, and Kurama covered them. Of course, the sight of the almost 4-foot-tall fox caused many of the villagers more fright than the Grimm that were trying to have them for lunch, but with little choice and seeing said Kitsune tear into Grimm after Grimm with sadistic glee, the villagers took it in stride. Using Stormflower to slice into the throat of yet another Grimm, Ren gave a quick check to see if there were any more wounded or still living villagers. Feeling none, the raven-haired teen nodded to accomplice. "That's all of them. All we can do now is fall back and help the others guard the villagers." Being a man of few words himself, Fox nodded and followed after Ren. The scene they arrived to was one the younger teen half expected to see. Velvet was standing guard, her rabbit ears twitching ever now and again and looking like she hadn't done that much fighting. Seeing how Nora was swinging Magnahald around, each hit landing with enough force to dent metal, while she hummed what sounded eerily like "Let the bodies hit the floor," showed why the young fauness hadn't interfered yet. Kurama was meanwhile a lot less humane with his methods, yet still maintained that same enthusiasm which, while somewhat adorable on the hammer wielder, was downright nightmarish on him. Seeing the multi-tailed fox use one of said limbs to spear through the skull of a nearby Beowulf, while he crushed another's chest with his paw, made both Fox and Rin all the more weary around the Biju. "Run! You find anyone else?" Nora asked in her normally bubbly tone. This wouldn't be all that noteworthy if it wasn't for the fact that Magnahald was currently pinning down a currently struggling and whimpering Beowulf. Ren sighed when his childhood friend pulled the trigger, sending her hammer plowing through the beast's chest cavity, looking unbothered by the slight crater she now stood in. "No, Nora, we didn't. For now we wait for Naruto or Pira to dash." The howl of a Beowulf coming only yards away sent shivers down his spine, stopping Ren from continuing. Emerging from the nearby street with a pack of salivating Grimm was the towering form of what could only be described as a demon born in the flames of hell. Normal Beowulf stood at the 5-foot mark, but this monstrosity towered above even Yatsuhashi at a jaw-dropping 7 feet. The scarred and battle-worn bone-like armor that covered its body only served to further the creature's intimidation factor. This was only further compounded by the blood that dripped from its fog-filled jaws and the blade-like claws that carved into the ground with each step it took. "It's one of the pack leaders. We have to fall back," Ren shouted. While he had no idea how strong Fox or Velvet were, he could clearly tell they shared his apprehension over having to fight this dreadful creature without some serious backup. Before they could begin their tactical retreat, Kurama stepped forward and stared down the pack leader with a hungry look in his own orbs. Fanning out his 9 tails, the Biju raised his head to the air and let loose a roar of frightening power, the sound waves hitting with enough force to break anything made of glass within the area. Following that was the feeling of raw power covering them like a blanket, their instincts screaming at them to run as far away as was possible. Adding to that growing feeling of dread was what looked like flames coming to life and covering Kurama, making him look less like an actual fox and more like an entity made of fire and pure energy. The grin that was stretched across his face, however, made it clear he was not a benevolent spirit. No, he was being of destruction, of raw power. That there's no way that he is just a normal fox. No creature should be able to exude such a suffocating aura. This is... I can't even breathe. I can't move. What is this? A horrified Ren thought to himself. Looking elsewhere, he saw Nora on her hands and knees, staring blankly ahead, her body shaking uncontrollably. Velvet looked to be only seconds away from trying to assume the fetal position, her body trembling violently. Fox looked no better, shivering as he gripped at his chest, no doubt to make sure his heart was still beating. The four young teens could only look on in horror as the two monsters began to move towards each other. I hope this pest at least puts up a decent fight. Naruto momentarily stared in the direction of where he knew Kurama and the others were as he felt a very familiar chakra skyrocket. Hearing his Biju's last thought, he knew that one of the pack leaders had been found. Normally he'd try and dissuade Kurama from using such a noticeable amount of his chakra, knowing firsthand how corrosive and terrifying it felt to be around, but taking in the circumstances he couldn't blame the fox. It had been a long while since the strongest of the tailed beasts had really stretched, and Naruto knew that Kurama enjoyed his freedom, and despite his progress with taming the Kyuubi's hatred, it didn't change the fact that Kurama still very much so enjoyed fighting and the rush that came with it. Something he and the chakra construct had in common, Naruto noted as he harshly slammed Hi-no Ishi into the chest of another Grim, causing its rib cage to cave in. A quick glance around him told him that both Pira, Koko, and Yatsuhashi were holding up well, though his partner and the towering teen of CFVY seemed to be a lot more serious about the situation when compared to the mocha-haired teen who was going around using her heels as weapons with surprisingly deadly results. Ducking under a swipe from a Grim, Naruto formed a Rasengan and with a grin placed it on the Beowulf's snout. Letting his control over it go, the poor beast was sent spinning into several of its brethren before the heap of them were caught in the blast of the jutsu violently unraveling. Without even blinking, Naruto quickly spun around, drawing out the blade of Hi-no Ishi in one fluid movement and bringing it to stop the clawed hand that had attempted to shred him to bits. Ocean blue orbs stared into angry red ones defiantly. Well, Kurama, looks like I found the other pack leader. Naruto! It's fine! I got him! Just keep the small fry off me and I'll handle this one. Whiskers, I swear if this is some macho display so you can dash. Grinning, Naruto decided to show the doubtful Koko why you didn't mess with an Uzumaki Jinchuriki. A quick use of his signature jutsu, and the next thing the Grim knew was that it had Naruto's boot being plowed into the side of its head. Consequently, the Beowulf was sent hurtling into a nearby house. Naruto and his clone grinned at each other, and fists bumped. Their little celebration was cut short when the furious Grim pried itself free from the rubble that had fallen on it. Grabbing a large fragment of the now destroyed building, the Beowulf threw the hefty piece of building material like a frisbee, aiming to take out the Rio Blonde. A quick use of Kawarimi prevented that. Futon Renkuden, drilling air bullet! Seeming to know that dodging was impossible, the Beowulf grabbed a larger piece of rubble and used it to absorb most of the jutsu. Using the dust thrown up by this tactic, the Grim disappeared. Naruto narrowed his eyes though when, instead of going for him or the others, the Grim used the chance to go elsewhere, looking like it was on the hunt for something in particular. They're definitely after something here. But what? Why go through all this trouble? Dodging under a strike from the Beowulf, Kurama used one tail to trip up the beast, the other 8 being used to pin it down. Opening his maw, the Biju grinned when it saw fear flicker in the Grim's eyes when it saw the broiling flames that sat at the back of its opponent's throat. A second later and the Kyuubi let loose, bathing the entire area around the two in a miniature firestorm. As if the sight of the whirling flames wasn't enough to strike fear into the onlookers, somehow the grinning visage of Kurama began to take form in the flames, staring them down with that psychotic gleam in its eyes. The cackle that began to echo around the silent village sent chills down their spines, telling them they were in the presence of a true apex predator. Thankfully, the flames began to gradually die down, taking the nightmarish image of the grinning kitsune with them. When the last embers finally flickered out, they revealed the now scorched and blackened earth. There was no trace of the Grim, or its corpse, any piece of it more than likely having been burned up in the blistering flames. What was left was the now shrunken form of Kurama, stretching casually as if it hadn't just unleashed a hellish conflagration and erased a no doubt decades-old and powerful Grim. Just what in the world are you? Rin thought to himself, wearily keeping an eye on the fox. Chibified or not, it was not so easy to erase what had just happened from memory. In fact, it would probably haunt his nightmares for the next few nights. Meanwhile, Kurama was left to his own thoughts. TCH, pathetic. I've had dinner that put up more of a fight. Naruto was putting his almost unparalleled levels of stealth earned from outrunning Anbu and Jounin after a prank while tailing the now only pack leader and soon to be only Grim left from the Beowulf group. Seeing as how the villagers were safe with the others and with his own group having whittled the once large pack down to only a dozen or so, he was comfortable with leaving them to handle themselves while he figured out what was the cause of this whole thing. Sure, it was normal for Grim to target human settlements, but it was usually the younger ones who did so with such ferocity. Older and experienced Grim like this Beowulf were more likely to just sit and wait, knowing better than to strike out at humans without some guarantee of victory or their own survival. Yet as they made their way through the village, the Grim was growing more and more frantic, seeming to lose the intelligence it had shown before. Knowing that the Grim were made of nature chakra, Naruto knew of only a few things that could cause such a reaction, and he was pretty sure that all of said items and abilities were long since buried and gone alongside the shinobi era. Seeing the now almost erratically twitching Grim arrive at what appeared to be some sort of small shrine, Naruto narrowed his eyes. "What are you after?" Following the Beowulf into the dimly lit shrine, the blonde shinobi could only stare in shock as a single phrase went through his mind: "Oh fuck all kinds of duck." There, sitting on a padded pillow and surrounded by a few dozen candles, was something that had once upon a time haunted his and his fellow Jinchuriki's nightmares. Some would see it as insignificant, and there was a time that Naruto would have agreed, but knowing that this particular item had belonged to what had once been the singularly most feared group of rogue shinobi had changed that outlook. Almost salivating, the Grim stared at the simple ring made of silver. Imprinted onto the ring was a simple purple background atop which the kanji Gyoku, ball/sphere, sat. As clawed hands touched the cold band of silver, Naruto's eyes shot wide open, feeling the chakra that made up the Grim beginning to violently fluctuate, growing so quickly that it began to become visible. "Kit! What the hell is happening over there?" Not waiting to see the outcome of whatever was about to happen, Naruto formed a Rasengan and smashed it into the distracted Grim's skull, the spiraling ball of condensed chakra grinding the beast into nothingness. Tightening his jaw, Naruto stared at the seemingly innocuous ring, questions rampaging through his head in a whirlwind of emotions. "I have the worst luck with missions,"